The first light came not as a change you could see, but as a slow thinning of the darkness inside the tent. The linen walls, which at night had been a deep grey, began to hold a faint pearly colour, the weave of the fabric becoming visible, thread by thread. You lay on the cot with your blanket pulled to your chin, your body still heavy and warm from sleep, and you watched this gentle brightening without any need to move. The air inside the tent was cool and still, carrying the dry scent of wool and the faint green smell of crushed grass beneath the floor cloth. Outside, the camp was beginning to stir, but the sounds reached you as if from a great distance, softened by the canvas and the morning damp. A single bird called from the oak grove that stood a short way beyond the earthworks. 3 clear notes repeated, then a pause, then 3 again. You let your mind follow that small steady rhythm without counting, without even naming the bird. After a while, other sounds joined it, each arriving in its own time. A distant murmur of men's voices, too far away to make out any words, rolled across the camp and faded. Somewhere closer, a cooking pot was set down on a stone, with a soft, dull clink. Leather sandals crunched very lightly on the gravel path between the tent rows, a sound that came and went. You breathed slowly, feeling the day enter the tent inch by inch, and you waited for nothing in particular. The servant came, and the light was strong enough to cast a shadow of the tent pole against the far wall. You heard his steps, unhurried and familiar, the soft scuff of his shoes on the beaten earth outside, and then the rustle of the tent flap being drawn aside, and then the rustle of the tent flap being drawn aside. He carried a small clay bowl in both hands and a piece of flatbread wrapped in a clean cloth. You sat up slowly, letting the blanket pool around your waist, and nodded to him. He placed the bowl and the bread on the folding table beside your cot, then withdrew without speaking, letting the flap fall quietly back into place. The whole exchange took only as long as a few breaths, and nothing in it was hurried or unexpected. The bowl held watered wine, cool from the night air, with a faint reddish tint and the mild, slightly sharp smell of vinegar. You lifted it with both hands and took a first sip, feeling the liquid move across your tongue and down your throat, leaving a clean, thin warmth behind. The bread was coarse and pale, dusted with a little flour, and you tore off a corner, chewing it slowly while you stared at the rectangle of light that now glowed on the tent wall opposite. The bread tasted of wheat and salt, and the faint tang of the clay oven it had been baked in. You ate without hurry, breaking off small pieces, sipping the wine, letting the quiet minutes pass. When the bowl was empty and the last crumb of bread had been swallowed, you set the bowl aside and swung your feet to the ground. The floor cloth was rough under your bare soles, a woven rush mat that had been laid over the soil. You stood, stretching your arms once, then let your hands fall to your sides. The cot creaked softly behind you as the weight left it. The tent was just tall enough for you to stand upright, its ridgepole running above your head like the spine of some quiet animal. You walked the few steps to the wooden chest that sat at the foot of the cot, its lid closed, its iron hinges dark with age. You lifted the lid, and the smell of seasoned wood and oil rose to meet you. Inside, each instrument lay in its own place, wrapped in cloth, or resting in a carved groove. You knelt and began to check them, one by one, in the same order you always did. The iron stem of the groma came first, a solid rod with a sharpened point at one end and a square bracket at the other. You ran your thumb along its length, feeling for any burrs or nicks, and found it smooth. The bracket was tight, its small wedge pins seated firmly. You set the stem aside on the floor cloth and reached for the cross arms, two slender wooden bars that fitted together to form a right angle. Their surfaces were worn to a soft polish where countless hands had held them. You fitted them together gently, checking that the joint was true, then separated them again and placed them beside the stem. Next came the leather cords, 4 of them, each ending in a small lead weight shaped like an acorn. You lifted them carefully, letting the weights dangle and spin very slowly in the dim light, watching to see that no cord was frayed, that each knot was tight. The leather was supple from years of handling, dark brown and slightly glossy. You coiled them loosely and placed them with the other pieces. In a shallow tray at the top of the chest lay your wax tablet, a wooden frame filled with a layer of dark wax that still bore the faint scratches of yesterday's figures. You lifted it out and turned it over, noting the smooth back, the leather thong that held the 2 halves closed. The stylus, a simple bronze rod with a pointed end and a flat spatula at the other, rested in its groove beside the tablet. You picked it up, felt its familiar weight, and returned it. The measuring rod, a decimeter of 10 Roman feet, was too long for the chest and stood propped in the corner of the tent. It was a wooden pole, square in section, marked along its length, with notches and small brass pins at every foot and every pace. You walked over to it, lifted it from its resting place, and held it horizontally, sighting along its edge to confirm it had not warped overnight. It was straight and true, as it had been the day before and the day before that. You set it back gently, hearing the soft thud of its butt end on the packed earth. All of this checking took time, but you never thought of it as a chore. It was simply the beginning of the day, a series of small, familiar acts that asked nothing of your mind. Each movement led to the next, the stem to the cross arms, the cords to the tablet, the rod to the corner. By the time you were finished, the light in the tent had grown from pale silver to a warmer tone, and you could hear more voices outside, still low and murmuring, the sound of men moving about their own slow morning tasks. You reached for your clothing, which lay folded on the chest, a tunic of undyed wool, soft from many washings, and a pair of leather boots that rose just above the ankle. You pulled the tunic over your head, feeling the fabric slide down your arms and settle around your knees. A thin leather belt with a plain bronze buckle cinched the tunic at your waist, and you fastened it without thinking, the tongue finding its familiar hole. The boots required a little more care. You sat on the edge of the cot and worked each foot in, tugging the soft leather until it hugged your heel. The laces were simple strips of hide, and you wound them around your ankles and tied them in a knot that would hold all day, but come loose easily at night. The boots were comfortable in the way that only old, well-shaped footwear can be, conforming to every arch and toe. Your cloak, a heavier wool of a brownish-grey color, hung from a peg near the tent flap. You took it down and swung it over your shoulders, the weight of it settling across your back like a familiar hand. You did not close the clasp at your throat just yet, because the day was still cool but not cold, and you wanted to feel the air on your skin for a little longer. The tent felt smaller with a cloak on, the walls closer, and you were suddenly aware of the world waiting outside. Before you left, you took one last look around the tent, your eyes moving from the cot to the table, from the chest to the rod in the corner. The bowl and cloth from your meal still sat on the table, and you knew the servant would collect them while you were gone. A small oil lamp, unlit, rested on a stool near the entrance, its wick trimmed and ready. Everything was in its place, and the sight of this order brought a quiet, unspoken satisfaction that you did not examine. You simply noted it and turned away. You pushed the tent flap aside and stepped out into the morning. The light, after the dimness of the tent, was soft, but everywhere a thin, dew-heavy light that seemed to rise from the ground as much as from the sky. The camp lay around you in a pattern you had helped to lay out weeks before, rows of leather tents and turf-built shelters, their entrances facing east, a wide central path of packed earth leading to the gate. The earthworks, a low rampart topped with a wooden palisade, curved gently to enclose the whole camp, and beyond them you could see the tops of oak trees and the pale, washed-out blue of the early sky. The grass inside the camp was short and trodden, studded with small daisies that were still closed against the dawn. Your boots left faint impressions in the damp soil as you walked away from your tent, heading for the open space near the gate where your assistants would be waiting. You moved slowly, not out of reluctance, but because there was no reason to hurry. The air tasted of mist and wet earth, and the faint, clean smoke of the morning cooking fires. It filled your lungs and cooled your throat. As you walked, you passed other surveyors' tents, their flaps tied open to show empty cots and folded equipment. A few soldiers were already up, some sitting on upturned buckets cleaning their gear, others walking toward the latrines with tired, easy strides. They nodded to you as you passed, and you nodded back, the small gesture requiring no words. A mule stamped its foot in the picket line, the sound dull and rhythmic. From the cook's area came the steady, low crackle of a fire being fed fresh wood, and the smell of porridge beginning to warm in a large copper pot. You reached the open space by the gate, a bare patch of ground where the survey teams gathered each morning. The gate itself was a simple opening in the palisade, wide enough for a cart, with a wooden beam that could be lowered across it at night. Now the beam stood propped against the post, and the gate was open to the fields beyond. Through it, you could see the landscape you would be working in today, a wide, gentle slope of fallow field, pale gold and green, rising slowly to a low ridge about a mile away. A line of darker green marked the oak grove, and a single white rock caught the early sun on the ridge's crest. Your two assistants were already there, sitting on the ground with their backs against a small supply crate. They looked up as you approached, and one of them, the younger, stood and brushed grass from his tunic. The other, older and slower, remained seated, finishing a crust of bread. They carried nothing yet. The instruments would be fetched when you gave the word. You stood with them for a moment, saying nothing, all three of you looking out of the land in the quiet way that surveyors do, letting the shape of it settle into your minds. The sun had now cleared the horizon fully, and the dew on the grass began to glitter in tiny, scattered points of light. The mist that had clung to the low ground was thinning, drawing back into the hollows and the shade of the trees. A light breeze stirred from the north, cool and smelling of hay, and you turned your face into it without thinking. The cloak lifted slightly at your shoulders and then fell still. You glanced back at the camp, where the morning routines continued in their slow, steady rhythm. A column of smoke rose straight up from the bathhouse furnace, unruffled by the breeze. A centurion's voice called out a name, the sound flat and carried away. A dog trotted across the central path, tail low, heading somewhere with quiet purpose. It was all so calm, so deeply ordinary, that you felt your own breathing match it, slow and even and unforced. After a time, you turned to the younger assistant and told him in a voice that was barely above a murmur to fetch the groma pieces and the measuring rod from your tent. He nodded once and walked off, his sandals making that same soft crunching sound you had heard earlier. The older assistant unfolded himself from the ground, stretched his arms overhead with a long, slow groan, and then stood waiting, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. You remained where you were, watching the field, watching the light change on the distant ridge, and you felt the day settle around you like a task that would ask nothing but patience. The tent you had just left seemed a long way off now, though it was only 50 paces behind you. The thought of it, with its cool dimness and its familiar smells, lingered for a moment and then faded, replaced by the open sky and the wide ground ahead. You pulled the cloak a little tighter, not for warmth but for the comfort of its weight, and you waited for the young man to return with the instruments, knowing he would walk at the same unhurried pace with which he had left. There was no need to watch for him. The camp, the morning, and the day all moved at the same gentle speed, and you moved with them. You leave the camp by way of the eastern gate, where the turf rampart slopes down to a narrow opening between two wooden posts. The sentry on duty is an auxiliary from the northern provinces. He gives you a slow nod as you pass, and you return the gesture without breaking stride. The path beyond the gate is a shallow groove worn by the feet of supply trains and patrols, its packed earth still holding the coolness of the night. Your two assistants follow a few paces behind, carrying the survey equipment between them on a long carrying pole. The path soon narrows, fading from a defined track into a faint line of pushed-down grass that curves around a stand of blackthorn bushes, still heavy with dew. As you walk, the smell of the camp, wood smoke and leather, and the faint tang of latrine lime gradually gives way to the cleaner scent of open ground and wet vegetation. The field opens before you, without announcement, a broad expanse of fallow land that rises almost imperceptibly toward a distant hedgerow. It is not dramatic, this landscape, but it is calm and wide, and filled with a particular silence that seems to deepen as you move away from the camp. The grass here has not been grazed for some time. It reaches midway up your shins and parts easily around your boots, with a soft, shushing sound. You notice the way the grass blades are bent in one direction, suggesting a prevailing wind from the west, a detail you file away without conscious effort. The morning sun sits at your right shoulder now, still low enough to cast long shadows across the uneven ground, and you can feel its warmth beginning to seep through the wool of your tunic. You shift the weight of the groma pole on your shoulder, adjusting the leather pad that keeps the iron bracket from pressing into your collarbone. The pole is made of seasoned ash, its surface darkened by years of handling, and it rests there with a familiar heaviness that has become, over the months, a kind of comfort. Your other hand swings free at your side, occasionally brushing the tops of the grasses, and you feel the slight dampness that still clings to the lower stalks where the mist has not yet fully lifted. The mist itself is a thin, hesitant layer that hugs the lowest folds of the field, dissolving even as you watch, and by the time you have walked 100 paces, it is nothing more than a memory of moisture in the air. Behind you the assistants walk in a matched rhythm, their footsteps a steady counterpoint to your own. One of them, a young man from the province of Gallia Narbonensis, carries the folded measuring rods bundled in a length of waxed cloth, tied with a simple leather thong. The other, older and broader in the shoulders, balances the wooden case containing the wax tablets, the stylus, the spare plumb lines in a small jar of chalk powder. Neither speaks. There is no need for conversation in this early part of the day, and the silence among you is easy and unforced. The only voices are those of the land itself, a language of small sounds that you have learned to hear without listening. The walk takes you along a line that only you can see, an invisible thread that runs from the camp gate to the survey point you marked yesterday in the wax tablet. You check your direction now, and then by glancing at the sun and by noting the position of a tall elm tree that stands alone at the field's far boundary. The tree serves as a temporary landmark, its outline stark against the pale sky, and you keep it directly ahead as you move. This is not a difficult navigation. The line is almost due east, and the terrain is gentle, but there is a satisfaction in maintaining a true course across a landscape that offers no clear path. You walk, and you keep the elm in view, and the slight adjustments you make to your heading are so small they are barely perceptible. The ground underfoot begins to change as you proceed. Near the camp it was dry and compacted, but here in the open field it is softer, more yielding, the soil a mixture of loam and fine clay that holds the shape of your boot print for a moment before the grass springs back. The color of the soil is a muted brown, neither rich nor poor, and you notice the way the morning light picks out the tiny grains of quartz that sparkle faintly among the darker particles. There are earthworm casts scattered across the surface, small coiled piles of digested soil that crumble when your boot brushes against them, and this tells you the ground is healthy, well aerated, good land that would grow barley or spelt if a farmer ever chose to break it for planting. But it is being fallow for at least one full season, perhaps two, and the wild plants have taken possession, the slender stems of wild oats, the flat rosettes of plantain, the feathery heads of yarrow beginning to show their first white buds. A small bird, a stone chat, you think, perches on a broken stalk, a dozen paces to your left, its dark head turning this way and that. It watches your passage with the bright, unblinking attention of a creature that has nothing to fear but also no particular interest. After a moment it flies off with a quick flick of its wings, disappearing into the low shrub that marks the edge of the field, and its absence makes the air feel even stiller than before. You keep walking, the grass swishing against your legs in a continuous, whispery rhythm that rises and falls with the unevenness of your stride. The slope of the field begins to assert itself, a gentle rise that you feel more in the muscles of your calves than you see with your eyes. It is the kind of incline that would not even register on a road, but is enough when walking across raw land to slightly alter the cadence of your breathing. You adjust without thinking, taking slightly longer exhales, letting your body find its own pace. The groma pole shifts on your shoulder with the tilt of the ground, and you steady it with your hand, feeling the cool iron of the bracket against your palm. The metal is still cold from the night air, but your touch begins to warm it. At the midway point of the field there is a long, low stone wall that runs roughly north to south, a boundary between one abandoned parcel and another. The wall is built without mortar, just flat stone stacked with patient care, and it has settled over time into a shape that follows the contours of the land like a spine. You approach it at an angle, your invisible survey line crossing it obliquely, and when you reach it, you step over rather than around, planting one hand on the topmost stone for balance. The stone is rough and pleasantly warm where the sun has been touching it, and covered in a crust of grey-green lichen that flakes slightly under your fingers. You cross and continue on, and the assistants do the same, the older man grunting softly as he lifts his leg over the wall, the younger one following with the easy agility of someone still used to climbing over fences in his father's orchard. Beyond the wall the grass is shorter, nibbled down by hares or perhaps by a passing flock of sheep some weeks ago. You can see the ground more clearly here, the bare patches where the soil has been exposed, the tiny ant hills that rise like miniature volcanoes, the scattered droppings of some small herbivore now dried and crumbling. The shorter grass changes the sound of your walking. It is now less a swish and more a soft brushing, almost a hiss, and you can hear the individual footsteps of your assistants behind you, the slight variation in their weight and gait. The younger man steps lighter, quicker. The older man plants each foot with a solid, deliberate pressure that you can feel through the ground as a faint vibration. A hare appears from nowhere, as hares do, starting up from a shallow form in the grass, not 10 paces ahead. It sits upright on its hind legs, ears tall and rotating like small radar dishes, its brown coat blending nearly perfectly with the earth. You stop walking, not from surprise, but from an old habit of stillness, when something wild is near, and the assistants stop too. The three of you frozen in the middle of the field. The hare regards you with one large dark eye, its nose twitching continuously, sampling the air. The moment stretches. The only movement is the hare's nose, and the very slight sway of your own shadow on the grass. Then the hare drops to all fours and lopes away in that peculiar, unhurried, looping run that is so different from the frantic dash of a rabbit, its powerful hind legs propelling it over the low vegetation until it vanishes into a dip in the land. You resume walking. The encounter leaves a small, pleasant residue in your mind, the kind of simple moment that has no meaning beyond itself. You do not think about it in words. You just carry the image with you, the hare's upright posture, the twitching nose as your boots continue to press their small crescent marks into the earth. The marks are temporary, no. By midday the grass will have straightened, and by tomorrow there will be no trace of your passage at all. The sun climbs higher, and the light shifts from the golden slant of early morning to a clearer, whiter brilliance that begins to dry the last of the dew. You can feel the temperature rising by small degrees, a gradual warming that is pleasant rather than uncomfortable, and the faint breeze that had been stirring the grass now drops away entirely, leaving the air calm and settled. In the stillness, sounds carry further, the distant cawing of a raven from somewhere behind you, the thin buzz of a fly passing near your ear, the subtle creak of the leather strap on your own shoulder as the weight of the pole shifts. The raven's call is a single drawn-out note that hangs in the air and then fades, and it seems to deepen the quiet that follows. You notice the wild flowers now, the small intense blue of speedwell, the yellow buttons of hawkbit, the delicate white crosses of shepherd's purse. They are scattered sparsely through the grass, not a carpet, but a scattering, and you see them one by one as you pass. There is no need to name them. You simply register their colors against the green, their shapes, their fragile steadiness in the still air. A bumblebee moves heavily from one hawk-bit to another, its body appearing too large for the wings that carry it, and you hear its low drone as you walk by, a sound that seems to hum at the exact frequency of the morning's warmth. Your shadow shortens as the sun rises, shrinking from a long stretched figure into a more compact shape that stays close to your heels. You can gauge the passage of time by its changing length, a measurement so instinctive that you do not consciously calculate it. You have been walking for perhaps half an hour, perhaps a little more, and the far hedgerow is now noticeably closer, the individual shrubs beginning to resolve from a single dark line into separate hawthorn and blackthorn bushes. Somewhere in the distance, beyond the hedgerow, you can just make out the beginning of a wooded slope, the trees still indistinct but carrying a hint of the darker green of oak and ash. That will be the edge of the survey area, the place where the new road will meet the existing track that runs from the provincial town to the river crossing. As you near the eastern end of the field, the ground becomes slightly rougher, dotted with tussocks of tougher grass that have not been flattened by any recent grazing. You pick your way around them without breaking stride, your feet finding the flatter spaces by habit. The assistants do the same, the younger man occasionally stepping higher to clear a particularly stubborn clump, the older man plodding through with a kind of patient endurance that accepts every obstacle as inevitable. You feel the slight burn of effort in your thighs now, not pain, but a pleasant warmth that reminds you of your own physical presence in the landscape. You pause once, briefly, to adjust the leather pad on your shoulder. The groma pole has rubbed a slight impression there, a small indentation that will fade by evening, and you shift the pad a finger's width to spread the pressure. During this pause, you turn and look back at the distance you have covered. The camp is visible as a low, dark smudge on the western horizon, its earthworks blending with the line of the land, and above it, a thin column of smoke rises straight into the still air. The sight is reassuring in a way, a fixed point in a wide world, but you do not linger on it. You turn back to the east and continue walking. The hedgerow arrives gradually, first as a thickening of the vegetation along a shallow ditch, then as a solid barrier of intertwined branches that marks the field's end. You find a gap, an old gateway where a wooden stile once stood, its posts now rotted and leaning. Beyond the gap, the ground opens again into another stretch of uncultivated land, this one slightly rockier, with outcroppings of pale limestone pushing through the thin soil. This is where you will set the first survey point, on a gentle rise that gives a clear sight line back toward the camp and forward to the wooded slope. You step through the gap and stop. You stand still for a long moment, letting the weight of the groma pole settle, feeling the slight breeze that has picked up again now that you have crossed into more open ground. The assistants come to a halt behind you, setting down their burdens with soft thuds. You listen to the quiet, the small rustlings and distant bird calls, the sound of your own breathing slowing back to its resting rhythm. The walk is over. The surveying will now begin. And for a little while you simply stand, in the sun, on the rise, looking out over the land that stretches away toward the trees. The stillness is deep and complete, like a held breath, and you let it fill you before you reach for the groma and begin the slow, patient work of setting it up. But that is for the next chapter. For now, there is only the walking that brought you here, the grass, the hair, the stone wall, the climbing sun, and the gentle, unhurried movement of a morning spent crossing a fallow field. The moment you step through the gap in the hedgerow, the land seems to exhale, opening into a broader, gentler shape that invites a longer gaze. The field before you is not quite flat, but instead lifts itself in a soft swell toward a low crest some 200 paces ahead, and it is this crest that draws your eye. From where you stand, the rise appears as a simple wave of grass and thin soil, crowned by a scatter of small white stones that catch the climbing sun. The view in both directions is exactly what a surveyor hopes for. Behind you, through the gap, the long fallow field stretches back to the camp, its turf ramparts now a dark line on the horizon with that single thread of smoke rising undisturbed. Ahead, beyond the rise, the land drops away gradually into a wooded slope where oaks and ash trees stand in patient, motionless rows. You let your breath settle, and you look, not staring, but simply receiving the landscape as it is, letting its contours speak to you without words. Your assistants have set down their loads on the grass and are waiting in a relaxed, standing stillness that mirrors your own. The older man has his hands on his hips, his broad face turned toward the north as if listening to something far away. The younger one squats on his heels, picking at a stem of grass and then letting it fall. Neither speaks, because there is no need to speak, and the silence among you is a shared understanding that choosing a survey point is not a matter of haste, but of slow, careful attention. You take a few steps forward, leaving the groma pole planted upright where you had set it on arrival, its iron point pressed into the soil just enough to keep it vertical without any effort. The pole stands like a quiet sentinel, and you walk away from it into the open ground of the rise. The grass on this side of the hedgerow is sparser, a thin covering through which the pale skin of the limestone bedrock shows in patches, and your boots make a different sound here, a crisper brushing that carries a faint, gritty undertone. The soil is shallower, and where it has been exposed by rabbit scrapes you can see the white, chalky texture of the subsoil, crumbly and dry. This is good ground for a survey point, you think, because the underlying rock will hold the wooden peg firmly, and the absence of thick vegetation means the sight lines will remain clear for weeks or even months. You are not yet committed to any one spot, however, and you continue to walk slowly along the gentle arc of the rise, your head moving from side to side in a steady, unhurried scan. The everyday heroes who different sensation the moist green of the fallow field and more of dry herbs and warm stone. It is the smell of wild thyme, you realize after a moment, crushed underfoot by some earlier passerby or perhaps released by the sun's warmth from the mats of tiny leaves that grow in the cracks of the limestone. The fragrance is faint but distinct, a clean, sharp note that rises as you walk and then fades when you pause, only to return with the next step. It mingles with the more distant smell of the hedgerow behind you, a dusty green aroma of hawthorn and bramble, and the combination is pleasant in a way that asks for no analysis. As you walk, you keep checking your position against the distant landmarks that will define the road's alignment. The camp gate, barely visible as a tiny notch in the palisade, lies due west. You confirm this by glancing over your shoulder and aligning the gate with a particular tent that stands taller than its neighbors. Ahead, the wooded slope is anchored by one very tall oak, whose crown rises above the general canopy, and you note that the line between camp gate and oak passes almost exactly through the center of this rise, which is why yesterday's rough scouting had brought you here. But almost exactly is not enough for a survey. The exact point must be chosen with precision, and that precision will come not from distant views alone, but from the immediate ground beneath your feet. You stop near the highest part of the rise and turn in a full, slow circle, taking in the complete horizon. To the north, the land is a patchwork of small fields and low stone walls, none of them cultivated now, their boundaries marked by lines of elder and hazel. To the south, the ground falls away into a shallow valley where a stream runs, invisible but indicated by a winding line of darker green and the occasional glint of sun on moving water. The stream will matter when the road reaches it, but for now it is simply a feature of the wider view, a piece of information filed away. The breeze, which had been absent in the sheltered field, is more noticeable here on the rise, a light, steady current that cools the skin of your forearms and moves the loose fibers of your tunic. It is not a strong wind, just a constant movement of air that carries the thyme scent and the distant sound of the raven you heard earlier, still calling its single drawn-out note from somewhere near the oak grove. After completing your circle, you lower your gaze from the horizon to the ground immediately around you. The exact spot for the survey point must satisfy several small conditions. It must be level enough for the groma to stand without tilting. It must be firm enough to hold the instrument's sharpened base against any accidental nudge. It must offer a clear sightline in at least two directions without requiring the removal of shrubs or large stones. And, ideally, it should be on a surface that will not become muddy or loose after rain. You begin to examine the ground with a closer attention, walking a few paces one way and then another, bending occasionally to part the grass and see the soil beneath. The first candidate is a flat area just below the crest, where the limestone forms a natural shelf about the size of a small table. It looks promising until you crouch and press your palm against it. The stone is solid, but slopes very slightly toward the south, an angle so shallow that only a surveyor would notice it. You stand and shake your head, not to anyone but to yourself, and move on. The second spot, a little higher, is covered in a thick tuft of fescue grass that feels springy underfoot, suggesting a deeper layer of soil that might not hold the groma's point securely. You stamp your boot once and feel the ground yield, and you reject this spot too without regret, simply moving a few steps to the left. The right spot, when you find it, announces itself quietly. It is a patch of ground where the grass grows thinner, a mix of wild thyme and small stonecrop plants that form a flat, almost circular mat. Beneath the plants, the limestone is close to the surface, and when you press down with your heel, you feel the firm, unyielding resistance of rock just under a thin cushion of soil. The spot sits exactly on the highest point of the rise, so that standing there you can see clearly in every direction, and when you turn to face the camp gate and then the tall oak, the line between them passes directly over your position. The sun is warm on your shoulders now, and you can feel the heat of the day beginning to accumulate, a pleasant warmth that makes the breeze all the more welcome. You stand on the chosen spot and plant both feet squarely, feeling the ground take your weight without shifting. There is a small tuft of longer grass just to the right of where you want the peg to go, and you use the heel of your boot to press it down flat, not tearing it, just bending it so that it will not interfere with the line of sight. The grass springs slowly back, but stays low, and you nod to yourself in a small, private gesture of satisfaction. Then you lift your head and look for the younger assistant, who is still squatting by the hedgerow, but now watching you with the alert, ready attention of someone used to taking direction. You raise a hand and beckon, and he rises and jogs over, his sandals slapping softly on the thin turf. "Bring the pegs," you say, your voice low and unhurried, and the assistant turns and trots back to the older man who has already opened the equipment case and is sorting through the contents. From the case he produces a small linen bag that clinks faintly with the sound of wood on wood. The pegs inside are simple objects, each cut from a straight-grained branch of beech about the length of a man's hand, sharpened at one end and squared flat at the other. The wood is pale and smooth, and the assistant carries the bag to you with both hands, holding it open so you can choose one. You take a peg and weigh it in your palm, feeling its lightness, its dryness, the way the fibers have been polished by the craftsman who shaped it. Then you hand the bag back and gesture for the mallet, which the assistant also fetches, a small mallet of oak, its head worn to a gentle curve by many hundreds of taps. You kneel down on the chosen spot, the grass pressing cool against your shins through the fabric of your tunic. With the peg held between your thumb and forefinger, you place its sharpened tip exactly on the point where the sight line from camp to oak crosses the center of the flat, time-covered patch. Your hands are steady. This is not a difficult action, but you perform it with the same care you would give to any measurement. The peg sits upright, its flat top catching the sunlight, and you take the mallet and deliver the first tap, a very light one, just enough to mark the soil. You check the position again, sighting over the peg toward the camp gate, then toward the tall oak, then back again. Satisfied, you tap the peg deeper, a series of short, gentle strokes that drive it into the ground with a soft, rhythmic thumping sound. The soil accepts it easily, the limestone just beneath preventing it from sinking too far, and after a dozen taps the peg stands firm, its top only 2 finger widths above the grass. You push yourself back up to standing and brush the bits of soil and grass from your knees. The peg is now the exact center of the survey point, the fixed mark from which all the day's measurements will radiate. The older assistant has wandered over and is standing a few paces away, watching the peg as if expecting it to do something. It does nothing, of course. It simply stands there, a small, silent wooden stake in a field, but its meaning is large to you. You step back to give yourself a wider view, and then you walk a slow circle around the peg, checking that it is visible from every angle and that no dip in the ground or clump of vegetation will obscure it when you are sighting from a distance. The peg is slightly darker than the surrounding grass, a warm, pale brown against the green and the grey-white of the stone, and it stands out clearly without being obtrusive. With the peg set, you feel the sun's warmth more acutely than before, and you realize that the morning coolness has now entirely given way to the full, calm heat of the forenoon. The breeze has dropped once again, and the air on the rise is still, heavy with the scent of thyme and warm earth. You reach up to the clasp at your throat and unclasp the cloak, letting it fall away from your shoulders, then fold it once, twice, and lay it over a low boulder that juts from the grass a few paces east of the peg. The wool, now spread flat, will serve as a small island of dryness for your instruments later. Without the cloak, your arms and neck are bare to the air, and the feeling is freeing in a quiet way, as if a layer of weight has been removed from your day. The younger assistant has settled back onto the grass near the equipment, lying on his stomach with his chin propped on his hands, watching you with the patient, unfocused gaze of a person who has no immediate task. The older assistant has taken a drink from his water skin and is now wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, his eyes squinting against the brightness. You walk over to them and pick up your own water skin, a leather flask shaped like a teardrop, the hide darkened and glossy from use. You pull the wooden stopper and drink, the water tepid, but clean, tasting faintly of the leather and of the well from which it was drawn. You drink slowly, in small swallows, letting each mouthful cool your throat before you take the next. The water runs down into your stomach, and you feel it spread outward, a quiet, internal refreshment that matches the stillness of the air. While you drink, you look again at the landscape. But now your looking is different, no longer a surveyor's assessment, but simply a restful gaze. The land has not changed. It is the same gentle rise, the same distant hedgerow, the same wooded slope, the same thread of smoke from the camp. But seen from the fixed point of the peg, the world seems to have arranged itself around that small piece of beechwood, as if the peg had always been there and you had simply uncovered it. The illusion is a familiar one, a trick of the surveying mind, and you let it pass without comment. A butterfly, a small blue species you do not name, flits past at knee-height, its flight erratic and weightless, and you follow its path with your eyes until it disappears into the shimmer of heat rising from the limestone. You replace the stopper in your water skin and set it down beside the boulder, then walk back to the peg to perform one final check. Standing directly behind it, you lower your head and sight along the peg's top toward the camp, then toward the tall oak, confirming for the third time that the line is true. The alignment is perfect, and you feel that small, quiet sense of rightness that comes when a measurement sits exactly where it should, with no adjustment needed. You straighten up and take a final look at the peg, its top already beginning to dry in the sun, the fibers of the cut end showing a tiny pattern of concentric rings. It will serve. The next step, the assembly of the groma, will require the full attention of both assistants and a period of careful adjustment, but that is not yet. For now there is simply the chosen point, the warming sun, the scent of thyme, and the wide open silence of the mid-morning on the rise. You walk back to where your cloak is spread and sit down on the edge of the boulder, your boots planted on the grass, your hands resting loosely on your thighs. The day stretches ahead of you, long and unhurried, and you let it stretch. The work will come in its time, but this moment, this small pause after choosing, belongs to the land and the light and the quiet breathing of the earth. You close your eyes for just a moment, not to sleep, but to rest them from the brightness, and you listen to the sound of the raven, still calling from somewhere far away. With the peg planted and the survey point fixed, you turn your attention to the groma, which still stands where you left it at the edge of the rise, its iron base pressed into the soil and its pole leaning slightly under its own weight. You walk the short distance to it with the same unhurried pace that has carried you through the morning, your boots making that soft, gritty sound on the thin grass. The younger assistant sees you moving and rises to his feet, brushing the dry grass fragments from his tunic, and the older assistant sets down his water skin and follows, each of them sensing that the next phase of the work is about to begin. There is no spoken command, only the gentle, understood shift of attention that comes from working together for many days. You reach the groma pole and place one hand on it, feeling the smooth, cool surface of the ash wood beneath your palm. The pole is taller than you by about a head, its upper end fitted with the iron bracket that will hold the cross arms, and its lower end terminates in a sharpened iron spike, now hidden in the soil. You rock it gently from side to side to loosen the soil's grip, then lift it free with a single, steady pull. The spike emerges with a faint, sucking sound, a small clod of darker earth clinging to it. You tap the clod off against the heel of your boot, and then carry the pole horizontally across your shoulder, the way a shepherd might carry a crook, and walk back toward the peg where the assembly will take place. The two assistants have already opened the equipment case and are laying out the remaining pieces on the cloth that had wrapped the measuring rods. The cross arms come first, two slender wooden bars, each about the length of a man's forearm, one with a square notch cut exactly at its midpoint, and the other with a matching projection, so that they fit together to form a perfect right angle. The wood is dark with age and handling, and the joint is so well made that when the younger assistant slips the two pieces together, they fit with a quiet, precise click, like a latch closing. He holds the assembled cross up for your inspection, and you take it from him, feeling its lightness, the balance of it in your hand, the way the arms extend equally in 4 directions. Next, the cords and plumb bobs are lifted from their compartment, the older assistant untangling the leather thongs with patient, thick fingers that move with the slow confidence of long practice. There are 4 cords, each about a cubit long, their leather supple and slightly oily to the touch, and from each hangs a small lead weight shaped like an acorn, its surface marked with a faint patina of greyish-white. The assistant holds them up one by one, letting the weights dangle and turn, and you check each cord for fraying, each knot for tightness. Satisfied, you take the cords and loop them over the ends of the cross arms, securing each one with a simple hitch that you have tied so many times your hands perform the action without any conscious direction. Now the groma must be set up at the peg. You walk the pole to the spot and stand it upright, the iron spike resting on the ground exactly beside the wooden peg. The elder assistant steadies the pole with both hands while you fetch the mallet, the same small oak mallet you used earlier, its handle warm from the sun. You position the spike so that its point sits in the slight depression left by the peg's first tap, a small natural socket that seems to welcome it, and then you begin to tap the top of the pole with the mallet, driving the spike into the earth. The strokes are short and measured, not forceful but rhythmic, each one sinking the iron a little deeper into the limestone and soil. The pole trembles with each impact, a vibration that you feel through the mallet handle and into your wrist, and the older assistant holds it steady with a grip that never tightens too much, allowing it to settle into its own vertical line. You pause after a dozen taps and step back to sight the pole against the horizon. It stands nearly vertical, but your surveyor's eye detects a very slight lean toward the south, no more than a finger's width over the full height. You communicate this to the assistant, not with words, but with a small gesture of your hand, a gentle push in the opposite direction, and he adjusts the pole's angle by pressing the base of his palm against its side. You tap the top once more, lightly, and the lean disappears. You walk around the pole, checking it from every side, and the assistant holds it while you circle, his face patient and unmoving, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere in the middle distance. When the pole is true, you release the assistant with a nod, and he steps back, stretching his fingers. The groma pole now stands alone on the rise, a vertical line of dark wood against the pale blue of the sky, its iron bracket at the top empty and waiting. You pick up the assembled cross arms and carry them to the pole, lifting them overhead with both hands. The bracket is a simple U-shaped iron fitting with a flat base and two upturned arms, each drilled with a small hole to accept a bronze pin. You fit the cross arms into the bracket, aligning the central notch with the base, and then slide the pin through the holes, securing the assembly with a gentle push. The pin goes in smoothly, its end mushroomed from many insertions, and you give it a quarter turn to lock it in place. Now the plumb cords hang free from the four arms, the lead weights swaying slightly from the motion of your hands. You step back and watch them settle, each one finding its own slow rhythm as the last vibrations dampen out. The weights turn lazily on their cords, first clockwise, then anti-clockwise, then still. The four cords now define a set of vertical planes that, when properly aligned, will give you perfectly straight sight lines across the landscape. But before that can happen, the cross arms must be leveled, and this is the most delicate part of the assembly, requiring patience and many small corrections. You crouch down behind the groma, your knees pressing into the grass, and look across the top of the cross arms at the distant horizon. The cross arms themselves are not level. You can see that one arm dips toward the south, the same direction the pole had leaned, and this means the bracket must be adjusted. The bracket is designed to allow small rotations, its base fitting into the pole's top with a slight play, and you now reach up and loosen the bronze pin just enough to free the assembly without letting it slip entirely. The older assistant, seeing you do this, moves in close and places his hands on the cross arms, ready to tilt them at your direction. You begin the leveling by sighting along the north-south arm. Closing one eye, you align your gaze with the top surface of the wooden bar and note where it intersects the distant landscape. The bar surface is not a straight line against the horizon. It rises slightly at one end, and you signal the assistant to lower that end by a hair's breadth, your hand making a tiny downward motion. He responds with a pressure so light it is almost not a pressure, a shifting of his palm that moves the arm a fraction of a degree. You sight again, and now the bar is closer to true, but still not perfect. Another tiny adjustment, another long pause while you check, and then you nod. The north-south arm is level. You turn your attention to the east-west arm and repeat the process. The sun is now almost directly ahead of you, its brightness making it harder to distinguish the bar's top edge, and you cup your hand over your brow to shade your eyes. The assistant, anticipating this, has already shifted his grip, and you guide him through the same series of minuscule adjustments, your voice a murmur of down a little, no, up just a touch, there, hold it there. Each adjustment is followed by a moment of stillness while the cords sway and settle, and you wait for the weights to stop moving before you sight again. The wind, which had been light and steady, drops away entirely during this process, as if the air itself is holding its breath to let you work, and the silence that follows is deep and complete, broken only by the distant, rhythmic cawing of the raven. When both axes are level, you tighten the bronze pin fully, giving it that final quarter turn that locks the bracket firm. You then straighten up, your knees stiff from crouching, and walk a slow, full circle around the groma, checking the cross arms from every angle. They are now perfectly horizontal, the four arms extending like the spokes of a wheel, the plumb cords hanging in absolute vertical lines that seem to slice the air. The lead weights dangle motionless, their acorn shapes inverted in the small shadows they cast on the grass. The sight of it, this instrument of wood and iron and leather standing alone on the rise, brings a quiet satisfaction that you do not express but feel as a gentle settling in your chest. The younger assistant has been watching from his seat on the grass, his chin still propped on his hands, and now he gets up and walks over, curious as always. You let him look through the chords, showing him how to close one eye, underlying two chords with a distant object. He squints and bobs his head, trying to find the line, and you adjust his position slightly, a hand on his shoulder, until he sees what you see. He grunts softly, a sound of understanding, and then steps away, leaving you to the instrument. The older assistant has already returned to the shade of the hedgerow, sitting with his back against a gnarled root and his eyes half closed. Before you can begin the actual sighting, you must check the plumb chords one more time, because even the smallest movement can throw them out of true. You walk to each chord in turn, bending close to observe the way hangs in relation to the arm above it. The cord should drop straight from the exact end of the arm, not pulling to one side, and you adjust the hitches on two of the arms by loosening and retying them, your fingers working the leather with the ease of long habit. The knots are simple but strong, and when you are finished the cords hang perfectly centered. The weights are now so still that they might be carved from stone, and you stand back and let your gaze rest on them for a long, quiet moment. The sun is high now, almost overhead, and the shadows under the groma are short and sharp-edged. The heat has grown from the pleasant warmth of morning to a more insistent presence that you feel on the back of your neck and the tops of your ears. You walk over to the boulder where your cloak is spread and take out the water skin again, drinking more deeply this time, the water no longer cool but refreshing nonetheless. You pour a small amount into your cupped palm and splash it onto your face, feeling the momentary coolness spread across your forehead and cheeks, then wipe your face with the edge of your sleeve. The assistants have their own water skins, and you see them drinking too, the younger one tilting his head far back, the older one sipping slowly with his eyes still half closed. After the water, you take a piece of the flatbread that you had saved from breakfast, wrapped in the same cloth, and break off a corner. The bread is drier now, slightly crumbly, but it tastes of wheat and salt and the faint dust of the road, and you chew it slowly, staring at the groma as if it were a companion. The instrument stands waiting, patient as the land, and you feel no urgency to begin the sightings. The assembly is complete, and that is enough for now. The next task will be the careful alignment of the first straight line, the calling of the bearing to the assistant, the slow dance of hand signals, but all of that will come in its own time. You finish the bread and dust the crumbs from your fingers, then walk back to the groma and place your hand on the pole. The wood is warm now, heated by the sun, and you can feel the very slight vibration of the earth through it, a deep, almost inaudible hum that might be nothing more than your own pulse. You look down the length of the pole to the iron spike embedded in the ground, and you see that a tiny ant is climbing the metal, its body a moving speck against the dark iron. You watch it for a moment, its slow, determined progress, and then you lift your gaze to the horizon, where the line of the road will soon be drawn. The tall oak on the wooded slope stands exactly where you need it to be, its crown a dark, rounded shape against the paler green of the surrounding trees. The camp gate is a distant rectangle of light, and the thread of smoke has thickened slightly, suggesting a fresh log on the fire. Everything is in its place, and you, the surveyor, are in yours. You take a breath, long and slow, and let it out. And the afternoon that stretches ahead of you is filled only with the quiet, methodical work of sighting and marking, of measuring and recording, of drawing a straight line across a world that is otherwise all curves and soft edges. The raven calls again, 3 notes, then a pause, then 3 again, and you find yourself counting them without meaning to. The sound fades into the general quiet, and you settle onto the grass beside the groma, your back against the boulder, your legs stretched out before you. The cloak, still spread on the rock, gives off the faint, warm smell of wool, and you close your eyes for a little while, not sleeping but resting, letting the instrument stand guard over the survey point while you gather the patience for the sighting that will begin when you are ready. The day is long, and the road will wait. With the groma standing level and the plumb cords hanging in their perfect, motionless verticals, you move to the instrument's western side and lower yourself into a crouch. The sun is almost directly overhead, and the shadow of the crossarms falls in a neat, dark cross on the grass at your feet. The 4 small circles of the plumb bob shadows clustered at its ends. You settle your weight onto your heels, a position that has become familiar over years of surveying, and you let your breathing slow until it matches the stillness of the air. The moment before the first sighting is always the same, a brief quiet gathering of attention, like the pause before a singer draws breath, and you allow it to lengthen without hurry. You bring your eye close to the western arm of the groma, aligning yourself so that the 2 chords on that axis appear as a single composite line. The nearer chord, the one that hangs from the cross arm directly in front of you, blurs slightly at the edges, while the farther chord, some 10 feet beyond, stands out with a finer clarity. By moving your head a fraction of an inch to the left and then to the right, you find the exact position where the 2 chords merge into one dark, unwavering vertical stroke that divides the world in half. This merging is the heart of the groma's function, the simple optical principle that makes straight lines possible across a curved and uneven land, and you let your eye settle into it as a rider settles into a familiar saddle. Through the 2 aligned chords, you now sight the distant camp gate, which from this angle appears as a narrow, bright rectangle set into the darker line of the palisade. The gate is not perfectly centered in your sight line. It drifts a little to the south, and you make a small adjustment to the cross-arm bracket, loosening the bronze pin with a careful twist of your fingers and nudging the arm ever so slightly until the 2 chords frame the gate exactly. You then tighten the pin again and sight once more, confirming that the alignment is true. The whole adjustment takes several minutes, but feels, in the doing, like only a few slow breaths. With the western bearing fixed, you turn your attention to the east, shifting your crouch around to the opposite side of the instrument. Here you sight along the east-pointing arm, aligning its 2 chords with the tall oak on the wooded slope, the one whose crown rises above the canopy like a dark, rounded head. The oak is less distinct than the gate, its edges softened by distance and the shimmer of heat rising from the intervening ground, but you can see it clearly enough to center it within the 2 chords. You hold the sight for a long moment, letting the image settle, and then you stand up and stretch your back, feeling the small, pleasant ache of a crouch held too long. Now comes the act of transferring the invisible line from the instrument to the land itself. You call to the younger assistant, who is sitting in the shade of the hedgerow, and he rises and walks over with the measuring rod, a straight pole of 10 Roman feet, marked with alternating bands of dark and light wood at every foot. You gesture toward the east, toward the open ground that slopes gently down toward the wooded slope, and you tell him to begin walking in that direction, keeping the rod upright. He nods once, hafts the rod onto his shoulder, and sets off with the same easy swinging stride he has used all morning. You return to your position behind the groma and sight again along the eastern axis. The assistant is now a small figure moving across the grass, his tunic a pale shape against the green, the measuring rod bobbing slightly with each step. When he has walked about 100 paces, you raise your right hand, palm outward, and he stops immediately, turning to face you with the rod held vertical in front of him. The signal for stop is one you have used so often that it requires no thought, a simple lifting of the hand that he reads as easily as a spoken word. From where you crouch, the assistant and his rod are not yet on the line. They sit a little to the left of the two aligned cords. You extend your left arm horizontally and move it slowly to the right, palm flat, pushing the air, and he responds by sidestepping in that direction, his boots shuffling through the grass, his eyes fixed on your hand. When he reaches the point where the rod appears centered exactly between the two cords, you snap your hand downward, the signal for hold, and he plants the rod's butt end firmly into the soil. He stands there, a vertical human figure beside a vertical wooden pole, and you sight along the cords once more, checking that the rod has not drifted. It stands true, its alternating bands of color making it easy to see even at this distance, and you feel that small, quiet sense of rightness that comes when a line is exactly where it should be. You rise from your crouch and walk toward him, counting your paces as you go. 63, 64, 65. The counting is automatic, a background murmur in your mind that you will record later. The ground underfoot is the same thin grass and limestone you have been walking on all morning, but as you descend the gentle slope it becomes slightly deeper, the soil a little softer, and the grass thickens into tussocks that you step over without slowing. The assistant waits beside the rod, his weight shifted onto one hip, his face turned toward you with the patient expression of a person who is paid to stand still. When you reach him, you take the rod from his hands and check its verticality, sighting along its length against the distant horizon. It is perfectly upright, and you nod and hand it back. From the pouch at his belt he produces a wooden stake, identical to the one you planted earlier, and a small mallet of his own. You take the stake and kneel, placing its sharpened tip against the ground exactly where the rod's base had rested, in the small circular impression it left in the soil. You drive the stake with the same series of short, measured taps you used on the rise, the sound a soft rhythmic thumping that carries only a short distance before being absorbed by the open air. When the stake is set, its flat top just visible above the grass, you stand and sight back toward the groma, which now looks very small and distant on its rise, a dark cross against the pale sky. The line between stake and instrument is invisible but real, a straight edge drawn across the landscape by the geometry of chords and weights. You leave the assistant at the stake with instructions to keep it steady, and you walk back to the groma. The walk is slower this time, your eyes on the ground as you note the small features that cross the line. A low hummock of grass, a flat stone half buried, a scatter of rabbit droppings, a patch of bare soil where the limestone breaks the surface. None of these will obstruct the road's construction, but a good surveyor notes them anyway, building a mental map of every foot of the route. You reach the groma and crouch behind it again, sighting from the instrument to the stake. The stake is perfectly aligned with the chords, and you allow yourself a single, slow blink of satisfaction before you call the younger assistant back. He jogs toward you, the measuring rod balanced easily across his shoulder, and when he arrives, you instruct him to fetch the groma and carry it to the stake. This is the repetitive heart of the surveying day. Sight, mark, move the instrument, sight again. The assistant nods and begins to dismantle the groma with the same care you would use, loosening the bronze pin and lifting the cross arms free, then pulling the pole from the ground with a steady, rocking motion. The iron spike comes up with a small shower of soil, and he wipes it clean on the grass before laying the pole over his shoulder and walking toward the stake. The older assistant, who has roused himself from the hedgerow shade, carries the remaining equipment in his wake. You walk ahead of them, reaching the stake first, and there you wait while the assistant set up the groma again. The process is the same as before, but quicker now because the ground is softer and the pole sinks with fewer taps. The cross arms are fitted, the chords checked, the leveling adjusted with a few small tilts of the bracket, and soon the instrument stands over the stake like a guardian, its 4 arms extending to the 4 directions. You crouch behind it and sight back to the west, toward the original survey point on the rise, which is marked by the first peg you planted. The peg is visible as a tiny, pale dot, and you center it within the 2 western chords, confirming that the line has not deviated. Then you turn and sight east again, toward the tall oak, and you begin the process of directing the younger assistant along the next segment. He walks out once more, the measuring rod upright, and you guide him with the same hand signals: stop, left, right, a little more, hold. The gestures are slow and deliberate, each one held long enough for him to see and respond, and the wind carries away the small sounds of his boots in the grass. When he reaches the line, you snap your hand down, and he plants the rod, and you walk forward to meet him, counting your paces again. 1 and 12 this time, a longer segment, and the count fills your mind with a steady, rhythmic murmur that pushes out all other thoughts. The second stake is driven, the groma moved, the sighting repeated, and the morning passes in this way, a slow accumulation of small, precise actions that link together like the beads of a necklace. By the time the sun has moved perceptibly from its zenith, you have sighted and marked 7 segments, each one a perfectly straight extension of the last, and the line now runs from the initial peg on the rise all the way to a point just short of the stream that you noted earlier from the high ground. The 7th stake stands in a slight hollow where the grass grows thicker and greener, a place that collects the runoff from the slope above, and you pause there to drink from your water skin and to look back at the line you have drawn across the land. The stakes are visible as a series of small, pale marks receding into the distance, and they seem to pull the eye naturally along them, a path that invites walking even though no road has yet been built. The groma, set up over the 7th stake, casts a long shadow now that the sun has begun its slow descent toward the west, and the raven, silent for a while, calls again from the direction of the oak grove. You kneel beside the groma and place your hand on the pole, feeling the warmth of the wood and the slight vibration that passes through it from the earth. The instrument has become an extension of your own body by now, a third eye that sees in straight lines, and you feel its presence as a steady, reassuring weight in the landscape. The younger assistant has sat down on the grass a few feet away, his back against a small boulder, and is chewing on a stalk of wild fennel, his eyes half closed. The older assistant is inspecting the leather cords, running them through his fingers to check for any new wear. The afternoon is warm and still, and the work continues at the same slow, patient pace with which it began. You rise and sight along the eastern arm again, this time toward the stream. The stream itself is not yet visible from this hollow, but you can see the line of darker green that marks its course, a tangle of willows and alders that cuts diagonally across the survey line at a shallow angle. The road, when it is built, will need to cross the stream, and this will require an offset, a small adjustment of the line to meet the water at a right angle so that a simple bridge or culvert can be placed. But that is a task for later, after the distance has been measured and recorded. For now you simply note the stream's position and continue the sighting, directing the younger assistant to walk out once more with the rod. He goes, and you guide him, and another stake is driven into the ground. The line creeps forward, pace by pace, across the gentle slope and down into the hollow, and the afternoon wears on in a quiet rhythm of sighting and marking, of walking and counting, of the soft thump of the mallet and the gentle hiss of the breeze in the grass. Nothing hurries, nothing shouts, nothing demands your attention beyond the next placement of the rod and the next alignment of the cords. The world shrinks to the small circle of the groma's shadow and the distant figure of the assistant and the straight, invisible line that connects them, and in that small world you are entirely at peace. The groma stands silent now, its cross arms level and its plumb lines hanging still, having done its work for this section of the line. The first forward stake has been driven at the far end of the initial sighting, a slim wooden marker that you can see from where you stand, its top a pale dot against the darker grass of the middle field. Between the survey peg at your feet and that distant stake lies a stretch of open ground that must now be measured, foot by careful foot, with the desempeder. You turn away from the groma and walk to the equipment case, where the measuring rod lies wrapped in its waxed cloth. The younger assistant, seeing your intention, rises and unbinds the cloth, letting it fall open to reveal the long wooden pole within. The desempeder is exactly 10 Roman feet in length, which is a little less than the height of 2 men standing one atop the other, but it seems larger when you lift it from the cloth and balance it across your open palms. It is made of well-seasoned beech, square in section, each face planed smooth and then rubbed with oil until the grain shows as a faint flowing pattern of darker and lighter browns. The corners are slightly rounded from years of handling, and the ends are capped with thin brass plates to prevent the wood from splitting. Along each face the measurements are marked. At every foot, a small brass pin has been driven into the wood, its flat head polished by countless touches. At every pace of 5 feet there is a notch, a shallow V-shaped cut filled with red chalk dust that has long since become part of the wood itself. You run your thumb along the pins, feeling their smooth, cool surfaces, and you count them softly to yourself, not because you expect any to be missing, but because the act of checking is part of the rhythm. The rod is not heavy, but it is long and requires a certain care in handling. You lift it to your shoulder and let it rest there, one end projecting forward and the other back, and you walk with it to the survey peg where the measurement will begin. The younger assistant follows with a sharpened stick in his hand and a small leather bag of chalk dust tied at his belt, while the older assistant remains by the groma, his job for the moment simply to watch and ensure that nothing disturbs the instrument. The distance to the peg is short, and you cover it with the rod balanced easily, your free hand swinging to keep your balance on the uneven ground. At the peg, you lower the rod from your shoulder and stand it upright, its brass-capped butt resting on the grass. You look along the line at the sighted stakes. The peg here, the first stake some 300 or 400 paces away, and beyond that, the distant tall oak that defines the road's alignment. The measurement will proceed step by step along this invisible line, and you will call out the count so that the assistant can record the numbers in the soil. It is simple work, repetitive work, but it demands a precise attention, because any error, any slight misplacement of the rod will accumulate over the length of a mile into a significant deviation. The thought does not worry you. It is simply a fact of the trade, like the weight of the mallet or the tension of a plumb cord. You take a position directly behind the peg, facing the distant stake. The descendeur now comes down from the vertical, and is laid gently on the ground, one end touching the base of the peg, the rod stretching out along the sight line. You crouch and sight along its length, closing one eye to check that it is perfectly aligned with the stake ahead. The brass pin at the far end of the rod, the 10-foot mark, must sit exactly on the line, and you nudge the rod's far end a finger's width to the left until it does. The grass beneath the rod bends and springs back as you adjust, and when you are satisfied you press the rod down firmly so that it lies flat and steady. The older assistant from his post by the groma gives a slow nod, confirming that the rod looks true from his angle as well. With the rod positioned, you take the piece of chalk from the bag at your waist. A small lump of white crumbly stone leaves a dry, dusty feeling on your fingers. You mark the ground at the rod's far end, drawing a short line in the soil where the next length will begin. The soil is soft enough here to take the mark clearly, a thin white scratch that shows up against the brown earth. You then lift the rod, gripping it with both hands, and walk forward to the mark. Your boots crush a few stems of grass as you move, and the assistant steps aside to give you room. You lay the rod down again, its butt this time on the chalk mark, and again you sight along it, adjust it, and press it flat. Another chalk mark, another step forward, and the first full rod length has been measured. The process settles quickly into a rhythm, a slow and steady cadence that begins to occupy your mind entirely. The actions repeat. Lift the rod from the ground, hold it horizontally at waist height, walk forward the exact length of the rod, lower it, place the butt on the previous mark, sight along it toward the stake, adjust the far end left or right by a hair, press it flat, then crouch to draw the new chalk mark. Each cycle takes perhaps 20 or 30 seconds, and each cycle is almost identical to the one before, and yet within that sameness there is a quiet variation, a slightly deeper breath before lifting, a pause to brush away an ant that has crawled onto the wood, a moment when the sun slits behind a wisp of cloud, and the light softens and then sharpens again. You count the rod lengths aloud in a low voice, a murmur that is more for yourself than for the assistant, who is making his own tally in the soil with his sharpened stick. 1, you say as the first mark is drawn. 2, as the second length is completed. The numbers rise slowly, and with each number you feel the distance growing behind you, a lengthening chain of measured feet stretching back to the peg. The younger assistant walks beside you at a slight distance, his head down, watching the ground. Every 10 rod lengths, which is 100 feet or 20 paces, he stoops and scratches a deeper mark, a cross in the soil, and then calls out the count in a clearer voice, 10 rods. 100 feet. You nod without speaking and continue. The cross marks sit at regular intervals along the line, a series of small dark scars on the earth that will remain for a few days until the rain or the wind erases them. The sun is now high, and the heat has become a steady presence, a weightless pressure on your head and shoulders. Your shadow is a small compact shape that moves beneath you, and the rod's shadow is a thin line that flickers on the grass as you walk. Sweat begins to form on your forehead and at the small of your back, not in a rush but gradually, a slow gathering of moisture that the breeze, when it comes, cools for a moment before the warmth returns. You do not mind the heat. It is simply part of the day, and the work of measuring is absorbing enough that your body's small discomforts recede to a distant place in your awareness. The ground beneath the rod changes as you progress. Near the peg, the soil was thin and chalky, with limestone close to the surface. Now, as you move further from the rise, the land dips slightly, and the soil deepens, becoming a richer brown, softer, and more crumbly underfoot. The chalk marks show up more clearly against it, white lines that stand out boldly. The grass here is thicker too, a mix of fescue and ryegrass that has grown taller because no sheep have grazed this middle part of the field. The rod presses the grass flat as you lay it down, and when you lift it, the blades spring slowly back, leaving a faint rectangular imprint that will disappear within the hour. You notice these small details without stopping, your mind registering them in a calm, peripheral way, as if the measuring itself has opened a channel for the world to enter. At the 20th rod length, you call a brief halt. Not because you were tired, but because the rod's far end has landed on a small embedded stone that prevents it from lying perfectly flat. You bend and work the stone loose with your fingers, its surface rough and warm, and you toss it aside into the longer grass. The small depression it leaves behind you fill with a pinch of soil, tamping it down with your fist until the ground is level again. Then you resume, and the next rod length is true, the chalk mark clean and straight. The interruption was so minor that it barely registers, a small ripple in the steady flow of the work. The count continues to climb. 21, 22. The words are spoken softly, and the assistant's answering scratch in the soil is a sound you have grown accustomed to, a brief, gritty scrape that punctuates each 10. The numbers grow larger, and with them the sense of distance covered, but you do not hurry. Each rod length is given the same attention as the first, the same careful sighting and adjustment, the same firm pressing of the wood into the earth. To hurry would be to invite error, and error in a measurement is a thing that must be corrected later, costing far more time than the patience required now. So you move at a pace that feels natural, neither fast nor slow, a rhythm that your body has learned over many such days. After a while, you become aware of the sounds that accompany your work. The rod, as it is lifted and set down, makes a low, woody thump, followed by the softer rustle of grass. Your boots make a steady crunching sound, a 2-beat rhythm of left then right, and the chalk, when it is drawn across the soil, makes a dry, scratching hiss that is different from the assistant's deeper scratch. A skylark begins to sing somewhere above you, its long, trilling song falling from the sky like a shower of tiny notes, and you listen to it without looking up, letting it weave into the rhythm of your movements. The bird climbs and climbs, and its song fades and returns as the breeze shifts, and then after a time it descends and falls silent, leaving the air feeling emptier than before. The tally now reaches 30 rods, which is 300 feet, and the assistant calls it out in his clear voice, then stoops to scratch the mark. You pause to look back along the line you have measured. The peg on the rise is still visible, a tiny upright line against the pale stones, and the series of chalk marks and cross scratches leads back to it in a nearly straight row. The near perfection of the line is satisfying in a quiet, geometric way, a simple proof that the work has been done correctly. You turn and look forward to the stake, which is now noticeably closer, its shape resolving from a dot into a distinct wooden post with a flat top. There is still a good distance to cover, perhaps 20 more rod lengths, but the sight of the stake growing nearer gives a gentle sense of progress that you acknowledge and then set aside, returning your attention to the rod and the soil and the next chalk mark. A small breeze stirs the grass around you, and you feel it on your face as a brief, cool relief. The breeze carries the scent of the wild thyme from the rise, now faint and mixed with the earthier smell of the deeper soil. It also carries the sound of the raven, which has moved to a new perch somewhere in the oak grove, its call now a single, distant note that hangs in the air and then dissolves. You take a deep breath, filling your lungs with the scented air, and then you lift the rod, walk forward, and continue. The monotony of the measuring is not a burden, but a kind of meditation. Your mind, freed from any need to make decisions, settles into a calm, observing state. You notice the small life of the field, the ants that hurry across the rod when it rests on the ground, the tiny black beetles that scuttle away from the chalk marks, the single white feather that has fallen from the skylark and now rests on a grass stem, trembling in the breeze. You notice the way the sun has moved, its angle shifting the shadow slightly, so that the rod's shadow now falls to the left of the line, instead of directly beneath. You notice the texture of the wood under your hands, the way the oiled surface feels warm and smooth, the tiny indentations where the grain has been worn away by years of use. All of these things pass through your awareness without demanding anything, and you let them come and go as you lift the rod, walk, lower, sight, adjust, press, and mark. The assistant, too, has fallen into a rhythm of his own. He walks with a slight stoop, his sharpened stick held ready, his eyes fixed on the ground a few paces ahead. Every 10 rod length he marks the cross and calls the number, and then he straightens and rolls his shoulders before continuing. He does not speak otherwise, and you do not expect him to. The silence between you is comfortable, a working silence that requires no filling. At 40 rod lengths, you stop for a drink of water. The rod is laid carefully on the grass, its brass-capped end glinting in the sun, and you walk over to where the assistant's water skins are lying in the shade of a small gorse bush. You drink deeply, the water now warm but still refreshing, and you pour a little over your hands and splash it onto the back of your neck. The younger assistant does the same, and for a moment the two of you stand together in the shade, saying nothing, looking at the line of marks that stretches across the field. The older assistant has not moved from his post by the groma, but you can see him sitting now, his back against the boulder, his hat pulled low over his eyes. The sight is reassuring, a fixed point in the landscape, a reminder that the work is part of a larger, shared endeavor. After the water, you return to the rod and the lime. The measurement resumes, and the count climbs through 41, 42, 43. The rod feels a little heavier now, not because it has changed, but because your arms are beginning to register the repeated lifting. It is a mild fatigue, a gentle burning in the shoulders and the lower back, and you welcome it as a sign that the work is progressing. You adjust your grip slightly, holding the rod a little closer to its center, and the balance improves, the weight distributing more evenly between your hands. The chalk piece is worn down to a small nub, and you pause to take a fresh piece from the bag. The new chalk is larger and rougher, and it makes a broader mark on the soil, a thick white line that is easier to see. The old nub you place in a pocket of your tunic, where it will be saved for some later finer marking. This small act of conservation is automatic, a habit born of working far from supply stores, and you perform it without thought. The stake is now very close, only a few rod lengths away. You can see the details of its surface, the way the bark has been stripped in long, clean strokes, the slight split at the top where the mallet struck it, the tiny shadow it casts on the grass. The line of your measurement is approaching it directly, and you begin to slow your pace, taking extra care with each placement to ensure that the final rod length lands exactly at the stake's base. The last few lengths are measured with an almost ceremonial precision, the rod aligned and realigned, the chalk marks drawn with a slow, deliberate hand. When the rod's far end finally touches the stake, you stop and straighten up. The butt of the rod sits flush against the wood, and the measurement from the peg to this point is complete. You call out the final count to the assistant, who scratches a deep cross in the soil and then recites the total: so many rods, so many feet. You repeat the number to yourself, fixing it in your memory, and then you walk back along the line to count the cross marks and verify the tally. The walk back is a reversal of the morning's labor, each cross mark a familiar waypoint, and your count matches the assistant's exactly. At the peg, you pause and look out over the distance you have measured. The line of chalk marks and crosses stretches away like a dotted path, a record of the morning's patient work. The groma still stands on the rise, a dark shape against the sky, and the older assistant has risen and is walking slowly toward you, his long shadow preceding him. You feel a quiet tiredness now, a pleasant heaviness in your limbs, and you know that the next task will be to record the figures in the wax tablet, to fix the numbers into a permanent form. But for a moment, you simply stand at the peg, the desempado resting beside you, and you let the silence of the field wash over you. The measuring is done, and the road has grown a little longer. With the measuring complete and the final tally verified, you walk slowly back along the line of chalk marks toward the rise where the survey began. The desempado rests across your shoulder, its weight now a familiar companion, and your boots find the same path they made on the outward journey, pressing the already flattened grass a little flatter. The younger assistant walks behind you, his sharpened stick tucked into his belt, his water skin sloshing faintly with each step. The older assistant has already returned to the shade of the hedgerow, where the equipment case sits open and the folded cloths wait to receive the instruments. The sun is now well past its zenith and beginning its long, slow slide toward the western horizon, and the light has taken on a slightly deeper color, a honeyed tone that makes the grass seem richer and the shadows longer. You reach the hedgerow and lower the desempado from your shoulder, leaning it carefully against the trunk of a hawthorn where it will not roll or fall. The brass end caps catch the sunlight and throw small bright reflections onto the bark, and you watch them flicker for a moment before turning away. The older assistant has laid out the wax tablet on a flat stone that serves as a natural table, its surface grey and slightly concave from years of weather. Beside it rests the stylus, the bronze rod with its pointed writing end and its flat, spatula-shaped eraser, and a small pot of lampblack mixed with oil, should any of the figures need to be darkened for permanence. You walk over to the stone and lower yourself onto a cushion of folded cloak, your back against the rough trunk of the hawthorn, your legs stretched out before you. The position is comfortable, the bark solid, but not harsh, and you let out a long, slow breath that you did not realize you had been holding. The wax tablet is a rectangle of pale beech wood, slightly larger than your two hands placed side by side, and it opens like a book on tiny leather hinges. The outer surfaces are plain and smooth, dark with handling, while the inner faces hold the wax itself, a layer of darkened beeswax poured into shallow recesses and then scraped flat. The wax is the color of old honey that has been left too long in the pot, a deep brownish gold, and its surface is soft and faintly greasy to the touch. Old marks are still visible in it, the ghostly traces of previous days' figures, lines and digits that have been smoothed over with the flat end of the stylus, but not entirely erased. This palimpsest of measurements gives the tablet a sense of depth, a record not just of today, but of many days layered one upon another, and you run your thumb over it, feeling the slight indentations of old numbers. You pick up the stylus and hold it in your right hand, the bronze cool and smooth against your fingers. The point is sharp enough to scratch the wax cleanly, and the spatula end is worn to a thin, flat blade from many erasures. You open the tablet fully and rest it on your thighs, its two leaves spread like the wings of a resting butterfly. The left leaf holds yesterday's notes, which you have already transferred to the permanent record in the camp, and you now erase them with a few slow, sweeping strokes of the spatula, melting the old wax just enough to fill the scratches. The surface becomes smooth and blank, a fresh page waiting for new figures. The smell of warm wax rises faintly, a sweet, clean scent that mingles with the thyme and the dry grass. The right leaf is where today's measurements will be recorded. You pause before writing, gathering your thoughts, letting the numbers you have counted settle into their proper order. The tally from the Decempeda sits clearly in your memory. The total number of rod lengths, the conversion into feet and paces, the distances between the peg and each intermediate stake. You recite them to yourself in a low murmur, checking that the figures match the assistant's scratched record in the soil. Satisfied, you touch the stylus point to the wax and begin to write. The first mark is the date, which you inscribe across the top of the leaf in small, neat letters. The Roman date is a simple formula, and you write it without needing to think, the day before the nones of the current month, the consul's names and abbreviation, the year since the founding of the city. The letters appear as pale, shining grooves in the dark wax, each one formed with a single, unhurried stroke. The stylus makes a soft, persistent scratching sound, a sound so quiet that it is almost absorbed by the open air, and you pause frequently to brush away the tiny curls of wax that accumulate at the tip. Beneath the date, you write the section number of the road and a brief description of the terrain, the field name, if it has one, the distance from the camp, the general direction of the line. This contextual information will help the engineers later when they come to build the road from your survey, and you take care to be precise. The description is not poetic, but practical, a record of the land's character in a few plain words. You note the soil type, the presence of the limestone outcrops, the approximate slope of the ground, the location of the stream that will require a crossing. Each word is chosen for clarity, and each word is scratched into the wax with the same patient attention. Now come the figures themselves. You begin with the distance from the camp gate to the first survey peg, a measurement you made yesterday and have carried in your memory overnight. You write it in paces and in feet, the 2 units side by side, and then you draw a small line beneath them to separate the record from what follows. Next comes the distance from the peg to the first forward stake, the stretch you measured this morning with the decempeter. You write the total in rods, in feet, and in paces, each conversion checked and double-checked. The numbers are small and compact, the wax holding them clearly, and you pause after each entry to read it back, your lips moving silently. The younger assistant has settled himself nearby, his back against the equipment case, and he is watching you write with the patient, unfocused gaze of someone who has nothing immediate to do. The older assistant is cleaning the decempede with a piece of oiled cloth, running the cloth slowly along each face of the rod, wiping away the dust and the chalk residue. The sound of these small tasks, the scratch of the stylus, the soft rub of the cloth, the occasional creak of leather as someone shifts position, blend into a gentle domestic quiet that fills the shade beneath the hedgerow. You continue writing, adding the distances between each intermediate stake, the bearings taken from the groma at each setup, the angle of the line relative to the cardinal points as estimated from the sun's shadow at noon. The bearing is given not in degrees, but in descriptive terms. Slightly north of east, a quarter turn from the camp's east wall, in line with the tall oak on the wooded slope. These descriptions, combined with the distances, will allow any competent surveyor to reconstruct the line even if the stakes are lost. You also add a note about the offset that will be needed at the stream, a small sketch of the right angle you will set tomorrow, the lines scratched into the wax as a simple diagram that looks like a carpenter's square. The sketch is not artistic, but it is clear, and you spend a moment looking at it, confirming that the proportions are roughly correct and that the important features are labeled. A surveyor's tablet is not a work of art. It is a tool, and its beauty, if it can be called beauty, lies in its precision and its usefulness. You add a final note about the quality of the ground for road building, good drainage on the rise, softer soil in the hollow, the stream bed apparently firm and gravelly. Then you set the stylus down on the stone and flex your fingers, which have grown slightly stiff from the sustained pressure of writing. A bee passes close by your ear. Its drone low and insistent, and you watch it as it circles the hawthorn trunk and then settles on a cluster of small white flowers that you had not noticed before. The flowers are tiny, 5-petaled, with a faint sweet scent that the bee seems to approve of. The bee works its way around the cluster, its body heavy and golden in the filtered light, and you let your gaze rest on it for a while, your mind still half occupied with the figures in the tablet. The scratching of the stylus has stopped, and in its absence the other sounds of the afternoon seem to grow a little louder, the rustle of the hedgerow leaves, the distant caw of the raven, the soft, rhythmic rasp of the older assistant's cloth on the decempeda. After a moment, you pick up the stylus again and review what you have written. The left leaf is now filled with today's entries, a dense but orderly arrangement of words and numbers that holds the entire morning's work in a form no larger than your hand. You read each entry slowly, comparing it to the tally in your memory and to the assistant's scratch marks, and you find no errors. There is one figure, however, that you want to double-check, the distance from the second stake to the third, which was measured over a slight dip that made the descempedo harder to level. You rub out the digit with the flat end of the stylus, smoothing the wax until the old number disappears, and then you press the corrected figure into the fresh surface. The correction is neat and will be invisible once the engineers copy the record onto papyrus. With the writing complete, you close the tablet gently, pressing the two leaves together until the leather thong can be wound around them and tied in a simple knot. The wax surfaces are now protected, the figures safe from smudging or dust, and the tablet becomes once more a plain, unremarkable wooden object that can be slipped into a leather pouch. You place it in the equipment case alongside the spare plumb cords and the chalk bag, and you close the lid. The case's iron latch falls into place with a soft, definite click. The shade beneath the hedgerow has shifted while you have been writing, the sun having moved far enough that the shadow of the hawthorn now falls at a different angle. A thin shaft of sunlight finds its way through a gap in the leaves and falls across your legs, a warm golden stripe that moves almost imperceptibly as the breeze stirs the branches. You shift slightly, moving back into the shade, and you become aware that your body is tired in a pleasant, used way, the kind of tiredness that comes from a morning of lifting and walking and bending. Your shoulders ache faintly, and your lower back holds a small dull tightness that will ease after a night's rest. You are not exhausted, you are simply ready to sit still for a while longer. The younger assistant has closed his eyes and appears to be dozing, his head tilted back against the equipment case, his hands folded loosely in his lap. The older assistant has finished cleaning the descempedo and has set it aside, its wood now gleaming faintly with a fresh coat of oil. He is now attending to the groma, which still stands on the rise, its plumb lines motionless in the still air. You watch him as he walks slowly around the instrument, checking the hitches and the weights, his movements, careful and deliberate. He does not need your supervision, and you do not offer it. You lean your head back against the hawthorn trunk and close your own eyes for a moment, not to sleep, but to rest them from the brightness. The inside of your eyelids is a warm reddish darkness, and you listen to the sounds of the afternoon, the bee still working its way among the flowers, the distant rhythmic tapping of a woodpecker from the direction of the oak grove, the very faint rustle of the breeze in the higher branches. These sounds are not interruptions, but companions, and they weave together into a quiet tapestry that fills the space behind your closed eyes. The thought of the road comes to you then, not as a plan or a problem, but simply as an image. A straight line of packed gravel and stone running across this field, crossing the stream on a simple bridge, climbing the far slope and disappearing into the woods. It will be built next season, or perhaps the season after, by soldiers and engineers who will follow your stakes in your tablet and your careful measurements. They will dig the drainage ditches and lay the foundation layers and pack the surface smooth, and when they are done the road will carry traffic for generations, carts and horses and marching feet, all of them moving along the line that you drew today, with your groma and your descempedo and your patient, repetitive work. The thought is satisfying in a distant, impersonal way, and you let it fade without pursuing it further. You open your eyes and sit forward, reaching for your water skin. The water is warm now, almost the temperature of the air, but it still moistens your mouth and throat, and you drink it slowly, watching the light change on the distant rise. The groma still stands there, A small dark figure against the pale sky, and the older assistant has finished his inspection and is walking back toward the hedgerow with his slow, rolling gait. The day is moving into its later hours, and soon it will be time to pack the instruments and begin the walk back to camp, but not quite yet. There is still a little time for sitting, for breathing, for letting the recorded figures settle into their permanent form. You take another sip of water, and then you lean back again, the tablet safe in its case, the work of the morning now a matter of record. The afternoon stretching ahead was nothing more urgent than the slow, steady return. The bee drones on, and you listen. The stream announces itself first as a sound, a low, continuous murmur that rises to meet you as you walk the survey line eastward from the hedgerow. The ground has been sloping gently downward for some time, the grass growing thicker and greener with each step, and now the land begins to flatten into a shallow valley bottom where the air feels cooler and heavier. You carry the groma pole balanced across your shoulder, its iron bracket removed and stowed in the equipment case, and you walk with the slow, deliberate pace of someone approaching a point that will require careful thought. The younger assistant follows with the cross arms and the plumb cords wrapped in their cloth, while the older assistant brings up the rear with the December die and the bag of stakes. None of you speak, and the only voice is the stream, growing steadily louder as the distance shortens. When you reach the line of darker vegetation that marks the watercourse, you stop and set the groma pole upright, its spike resting on the ground. The stream is not large, perhaps 3 paces across at its widest, and it runs over a bed of rounded stones that glisten through the clear, shallow water. The banks are low and grassy, undercut in a few places where the current has eaten into the soil, and a tangle of alder and willow grows along both sides. Their leaves are fresher, brighter green than the surrounding grass. The water moves with a steady, unhurried flow, its surface broken into small ripples where it passes over the larger stones, and the sound it makes is a complex, layered murmur, not loud but persistent, a background note that fills the little valley. You stand for a long moment simply looking at it, your surveyor's mind already working through the geometry that will be required. The survey line you have been following crosses the stream at a shallow angle, perhaps 15 or 20 degrees from perpendicular, and this will not do for a road. A military road crossing a watercourse must meet it at a right angle, or as close to a right angle as the terrain allows, so that the bridge or culvert can be built square and true. The offset that you noted in the wax tablet will be needed here, a small adjustment of the alignment that shifts the line upstream or downstream until it strikes the water at 90 degrees and then resumes its original bearing on the far bank. The work will require setting up the groma, sighting a perpendicular, measuring a short distance along the bank, and planting a new stake that will serve as the crossing point. It is a small geometric puzzle, the kind that surveyors solve many times in a season, and you approach it with the same patient, methodical calm that you have brought to every task today. You walk a little way upstream along the bank, your boots sinking slightly into the softer ground, and you look for a place where the stream runs straight and the banks are firm enough to support a bridge foundation. The alder branches part easily as you push through them, and you find yourself on a small, gravelly beach where the stream has deposited a fan of pale stones. From here you can see both the near bank and the far bank clearly, and the stream runs in a straight reach for about 20 paces before curving away into the willows. This will be the crossing point, you decide, and you turn and walk back to where the assistants are waiting. The groma is set up on the survey line, a few paces back from the water's edge, where the ground is level and firm. You assemble it with the usual care, fitting the bracket, attaching the cross arms, hanging the plumb cords, and leveling the assembly with a series of tiny adjustments. The sound of the stream provides a constant, gentle accompaniment to your work, and you find that it helps rather than hinders your concentration, a steady, washing sound that seems to clear the mind. When the instrument is ready, you crouch behind it and sight along the western arm, checking that the line back to the previous stake is still true. It is, and you rise and turn your attention to the perpendicular. To sight a right angle with the groma, you must use two arms that are adjacent, the north and east arms, or the south and west, depending on the direction you wish to turn. In this case, the survey line runs roughly eastward, and you need to turn it southward, upstream, to find the crossing point you have chosen. You move around the instrument until you are crouching behind the south-pointing arm, and you align your eye with its two plumb cords. The cords hang perfectly still, the lead weights barely quivering in the sheltered air of the valley, and through them you sight the younger assistant, who has walked to the water's edge and is standing with the measuring rod held vertical. He is not yet on the perpendicular. He stands a little to the east, and you signal him with your hand, palm outward, then a gentle pushing motion to the west. He sidesteps slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel of the bank, and you watch through the two cords as his figure moves across your field of view. When he reaches the point where the measuring rod appears centered exactly between the cords, you snap your hand down and he plants the rod. The perpendicular now runs from the groma through the assistant and onward across the stream to the far bank, cutting the original survey line at a perfect right angle. You walk to the assistant and take the rod from him, checking its verticality and then driving a temporary stake at its base. This stake marks the point on the near bank where the road will turn to cross the stream, and from here you will measure the offset distance upstream to the actual crossing point. You leave the assistant at the stake and walk back to the groma, counting your paces as you go. The distance is short, only 12 paces, and you add it to the tally in your mind. Now you must measure along the perpendicular upstream to the gravelly beach where the stream runs straight. You take the descempedir from the older assistant and carry it to the stake, then lay it along the ground with one end touching the stake's base. The bank here is uneven, tussocked with grass and studded with alder roots, and you must take extra care to keep the rod level. You sight along its length, adjust its far end, press it flat, and mark the soil with chalk. Then you lift the rod and move forward, laying it down again, measuring foot by foot along the bank. The ground slopes gently upward as you go, and the rod must be shimmed with a flat stone under its downhill end to keep it true. You find a suitable stone, a thin, smooth piece of slate, and you slip it under the rod, checking the level with your eye. The adjustment works, and you continue. The measurement along the bank takes 17 rod lengths, which is 170 feet, and at the end of it, you reach the gravel beach you found earlier. The stream here is exactly where you want it, running straight and shallow, and the far bank rises in a gentle, grassy slope that will be easy for the road to climb. You drive a new stake at this point, the offset stake, and you stand beside it looking back at the groma, which is now partially hidden by the older branches. The line from the groma to the offset stake is the perpendicular you have just measured, and the line from the offset stake across the stream will be the new survey line. meeting the water at a right angle. On the far bank, you will set up the groma again and sight a second perpendicular, turning the line back to its original eastward bearing, and the road will continue as before, with only this small zigzag to mark the crossing. The geometry of it pleases you in a quiet, abstract way, the clean right angles and the measured distances, and you take a moment to appreciate the neatness of the solution before moving on. The younger assistant has followed you along the bank and is now looking at the stream with an expression of mild curiosity, his head tilted. The older assistant is still at the groma, a patient, motionless figure in the middle distance. You call to him to bring the instrument, and he begins to dismantle it, working with the same slow, careful movements he has used all day. While you wait for the groma to be brought, you walk down to the water's edge and crouch on the gravel. The stream is clear and cold, running over stones that are rounded and smooth, their colors showing through the water in shades of gray, brown, and a few that are nearly white. Tiny water insects skate across the surface, leaving dimpled shadows on the stream, and a water boatman rows itself in short, jerky strokes from one stone to another. You cup your hands and dip them into the stream, feeling the cold bite of the water against your skin, and then you lift them and drink. The water tastes of stone and earth, and the faint, clean tang of the alder roots upstream, and it is so cold that it makes your teeth ache slightly. You drink deeply, then splash a little onto your face, and the coldness wakes you from the warm, drowsy rhythm of the measuring into a sharper, fresher alertness. The older assistant arrives with the groma pieces, and the two of you assemble the instrument on the near bank just beside the offset stake. You set it up with the same patient adjustments, leveling the cross arms and checking the plumb chords, and when it is ready you sight along the south pointing arm toward the stream. The perpendicular you need on the far bank must mirror the one you've just measured, turning the line back from the crossing to the original eastward bearing. You send the younger assistant across the stream to stand on the far bank, and you watch him as he picks his way over the stones, the water barely reaching his ankles. He climbs the far bank and turns to face you, the measuring rod held vertical, and you guide him with hand signals until he stands exactly on the line of the south-pointing arm. He plants the rod, and you sight again, checking that the alignment is true. Now, you must measure the distance from the offset stake to the far bank stake, which will give you the exact width of the stream at the crossing point. The measurement is short, only a few rod lengths, but it must be done with care because the stream bed is uneven. You take the descempeder and wade into the water, feeling the cold soak through your boots and the current press against your ankles. The stones underfoot are slippery with algae, and you step carefully, placing each foot with deliberation. At the stream's center, the water is deeper, reaching almost to your knees, and you hold the descempedator higher to keep it from the current. The measuring is awkward but not difficult, and you complete it in 3 rod lengths, the far end of the rod touching the stake on the opposite bank. You call the measurement to the younger assistant, who scratches it into the soil of the far bank, and then you wade back to the near side, your boots squelching with each step. On the far bank, you will need to set up the groma one more time to sight the new eastward line that will continue the road's journey toward the wooded slope. But that work will come after the midday meal, and for now you are content to stand on the gravel beach and let the sun dry your wet boots. The stream murmurs beside you, constant and unhurried, and the older leaves rustle in a breeze that you cannot feel. The adjustment is complete, the right angle is measured, and the road has been guided safely across the water. You feel a quiet, tired satisfaction, and you turn away from the stream to walk back to the hedgerow where the equipment case waits and the shade of the old oak beckons. The crossing is behind you, and the rest of the day stretches ahead, calm and unhurried as the stream itself. The stream crossing is behind you now, marked by a pair of stakes on opposite banks and a short line of chalk marks that climb the gentle slope of the far side. The groma has been dismantled and its pieces distributed among the assistants, the distemper cleaned and wrapped, the wax tablet closed and stored, and there is nothing more that requires your immediate attention. The sun stands at the top of its arc, a white coin in a pale sky, and the heat has gathered in the valley bottom until the air feels thick and slow, almost drowsy. You look toward the east, where the wooded slope rises in a series of green shoulders, and there, at the edge of the tree line, you see the tall oak that has guided your sighting since the morning. It stands alone in a small clearing, its crown spreading wide above the surrounding trees, and beneath its branches there will be shade, deep and cool and still. You lift the groma pole to your shoulder and begin to walk toward it, your boots squelching slightly from the stream water that has not yet dried, and your assistants fall into step behind you. The walk to the oak is a short one, no more than 300 paces across a field that has been left fallow for several seasons. The grass here is tall and bleached to a pale straw color by the sun, and it rustles against your shins with a dry, papery sound. The ground rises gradually as you leave the valley bottom, and you feel the incline in the muscles of your calves, a mild effort that warms you from within. The air, which had been cooled by the stream, now grows warmer with each step, and you can smell the dry grass and the faint dusty scent of wild carrot flowers that grow in white, lacy clusters among the stems. A grasshopper leaps away from your approaching foot, its wings snapping open with a sharp, dry rattle, and then it is gone, lost in the sea of straw-colored blades. The oak reveals itself slowly as you approach, its details emerging from the general shape of the tree line. The trunk is massive, wide enough that 3 men could stand with arms outstretched and not encircle it, and its bark is deeply furrowed, a landscape of grey-brown ridges and dark crevices that hold the shadows of past decades. The lower branches spread horizontally, some of them as thick as a man's waist, and they dig toward the ground before curving upward again, forming a canopy that is broad and dense and richly green. Beneath the oak, the ground is bare of grass, carpeted instead with a thick layer of old leaves and acorn cups that have been pressed flat by many seasons of weather. The shade beneath it is deep, a dark, cool pool in the middle of the bright field, and the moment you step into it, you feel the temperature drop, a soft, refreshing coolness that settles on your skin like a damp cloth. You lower the groma pole to the ground and lean it against one of the lower branches, where it rests securely in the fork of a limb. The younger assistant does the same with the measuring rods and the equipment case, setting them down carefully at the base of the trunk. The older assistant, who has been carrying the food bag, unwinds the strap from his shoulder and places the bag on a flat root that rises from the earth like the back of a buried animal. Then all 3 of you stand for a moment in the shade, not speaking, letting the coolness seep into your bodies after the long walk in the sun. The quiet beneath the oak is different from the quiet of the open field. It is a deeper, more enclosed silence, broken only by the very faint rustle of the leaves far overhead and the occasional buzz of a fly that has followed you from the stream. You choose a spot against the trunk where the bark curves outward to form a natural backrest, and you lower yourself to the ground with a sigh that you did not intend to make. The old leaves crackle softly beneath you as you settle, and you stretch your legs out in front of you, crossing your boots at the ankles. The bark is rough against your back but not uncomfortable, and you can feel the solid ancient presence of the tree behind you, a living pillar that has stood in this field for longer than anyone can remember. The younger assistant sits down a few feet away, his back against one of the thick roots, and the older assistant sits cross-legged beside the food bag, already untying its leather drawstring with his thick, patient fingers. From the bag he lifts a loaf of bread, not the flatbread of the morning, but a round, domed loaf of coarse wheat, its crust dark and crackled from the camp oven. He places it on a clean cloth that he has spread over the root, and then he brings out a wedge of hard cheese, its surface shiny with age and dotted with tiny crystals of salt. The cheese is a pale yellow, firm and dense, and it makes a soft, solid sound as he sets it down beside the bread. Next come the dried figs, a small handful of them, their skins wrinkled and dark and dusted with a faint white bloom of natural sugar. They are slightly sticky, and they cling together in a cluster until the assistant separates them with a gentle pull. Finally, he brings out the clay flask of Posca, its surface cool and beaded with moisture from the stream water he used to refill it earlier. The flask is stoppered with a wooden plug, and he loosens it with a twist and sets it upright in the hollow of the root. The meal sits before you, simple and sufficient, and you look at it for a long moment without reaching for anything, letting your body shift from the active state of work into the receptive state of rest. The shade under the oak is not uniform. Small gaps in the canopy admit thin shafts of sunlight that move slowly across the ground as the breeze stirs the leaves above. One of these shafts of light falls on the bread, illuminating its crust in a patch of warm gold, and you watch it for a while, noticing how the light catches the tiny ridges and valleys of the baked surface. The light moves inch by inch as the leaves shift, and then it slides off the bread and onto the cheese, where it glints on the salt crystals and makes them sparkle like tiny scattered gems. You reach forward and break off a piece of the bread, the crust cracking softly under your fingers, the inside pale and dense and slightly warm from the sun. You take a bite and chew slowly, your jaw working in a steady, unhurried rhythm, and the taste of wheat and salt and the faint sourness of the leaven fills your mouth. The bread is good, solid and honest, the kind of bread that sustains a man through a long day of labor, and you eat it without haste, letting each bite dissolve before you take the next. The younger assistant has taken a piece as well, and he is eating with his eyes half closed, his back against the root, his expression one of quiet contentment. The older assistant has cut a slice of cheese with the small knife he carries at his belt, and he offers the slice to you on the flat of the blade. You take it and place it on your bread, and the combination is satisfying, the sharp, creamy cheese contrasting with the plain, earthy bread in a way that makes both taste better. The cheese has a firm, almost crumbly texture, and it leaves a pleasant, lingering aftertaste that you savor between bites. You cut your own slice of cheese after a while, using the same small knife, and you notice how the blade slices through the cheese with a smooth, clean motion, the surface of the cut gleaming faintly. You eat the cheese slowly, in small pieces, and then you reach for a fig. The dried fig is soft and yielding, its skin slightly tough, but its interior sweet and seedy, and you chew it with your front teeth, feeling the tiny seeds pop between them. The sweetness is a welcome change from the savory bread and cheese, and you take a second fig after the first, eating it with the same slow meditative pace. The Posca flask is passed around, and you take a drink, the liquid cool and sharp with a taste of vinegar and water, and a faint hint of honey that the cook in the camp adds to the batch. The Posca cuts through the richness of the cheese and refreshes your mouth, and you drink a little more before passing the flask to the younger assistant. He drinks and hands it to the older assistant, who drinks and hands it to the older assistant, who drinks and then sets the flask back in the hollow of the root. The three of you sit in a loose, comfortable triangle, eating and drinking and saying nothing, and the silence under the oak is filled only with the soft sounds of chewing and the occasional snap of a twig somewhere in the field. A column of ants has found a crumb of bread that fell from your fingers, and they are working around it with a busy, organized urgency that seems, in the quiet of the midday, entirely peaceful. The ants are small and black, their bodies moving in a steady, purposeful line from a crack in the bark of the root across the cloth to the crumb and back again. They touch antennae as they pass, exchanging some small chemical message, and then they continue on their way, each one carrying a tiny fragment of bread or simply walking with the intent of one who has a task. You watch them for a long time, your chin propped on your hand, and their activity is so absorbing, so complete in itself, that you forget for a while that you are a surveyor, that there are stakes in the ground, and figures in the tablet and a road to be built. You are simply a person sitting under a tree watching ants, and that is enough. The breeze that had been absent in the valley bottom now finds its way to the oak, and the leaves overhead begin to stir with a soft, rushing sound, like the distant sea. The sound rises and falls, and the patches of sunlight on the ground shift and dance in response, a slow, moving pattern of light and shadow that plays across your legs and the food and the ants. The breeze carries the scent of dry grass and warm earth, and the faint green smell of the oak leaves themselves, a clean, slightly astringent fragrance that seems to wash the dust from your lungs. You close your eyes and let the breeze move over your face, feeling it cool the thin film of sweat on your forehead and the back of your neck. The sensation is deeply pleasant, a gentle, natural comfort that asks nothing of you. The older assistant has finished eating and has lain back on the leaves, his head resting on the equipment case, his hat pulled down over his eyes. His breathing is slow and even, and you think he may be asleep or close to it. The younger assistant is still sitting upright, but his eyelids are drooping, and his hands lie loosely in his lap, the fingers curled and still. You are not sleepy yourself, but there is a heaviness in your limbs, a pleasant weighted feeling that comes from a full stomach and a quiet mind, and you let yourself sink a little deeper against the oak trunk, your shoulders relaxing, your breathing slowing to match the rhythm of the leaves. The raven calls again, somewhere far away, and its voice is the only sound that seems to come from outside the small circle of shade. You listen to it without opening your eyes, and the sound is familiar and reassuring, a steady, dark note in the bright fabric of the afternoon. After a while the raven falls silent, and the only sounds are the leaves and the ants, and the very faint, distant murmur of the stream that you have left behind. The world under the oak is small and quiet and complete, a bubble of calm in the middle of the day, and you feel no desire to leave it. A second crumb of bread has fallen, this one from the loaf that still rests on the cloth, and a new line of ants is forming, a tributary that joins the main column at the edge of the root. The ants move with a patience that rivals your own, each one carrying its burden with a steady, uncomplaining persistence, and you wonder, in a distant, idle way, how many thousands of journeys they will make before the sun sets. The thought is not important. It simply passes through your mind like one of the drifting patches of light, and then it is gone. You reach for the Posca flask and take another drink, the liquid now slightly warmer but still refreshing. The vinegar taste is sharper this time, and it leaves a clean, dry feeling in your mouth. You set the flask down and pick up the last fig, turning it over in your fingers, feeling its wrinkled skin and the slight give of the fruit inside. You eat it in 2 bites, and then you brush the sugar dust from your hands onto the cloth, where the ants will find it later. The meal is finished, and you feel a quiet, physical satisfaction, a sense of having been fed not just with food, but with stillness and shade, and the simple presence of the oak. You lean your head back and look up into the canopy. The leaves are a complex mosaic of green, every shade from the dark, glossy green of the older leaves to the brighter, yellow-green of the newer growth, and the sky beyond them is a pale, washed blue. The branches crisscross overhead in a pattern that seems random, but is governed by the slow, patient logic of growth, each limb reaching toward the light, each twig finding its place. A small bird, a wren perhaps, flits from one branch to another, its movements quick and precise, and then it disappears into the denser foliage. You follow it with your eyes for as long as you can, and then you let your gaze fall back to the ground, where the ants are still busy with their crumb. The younger assistant has now lain down on his side, his arm folded under his head, his eyes closed. His breathing is slow and regular, and his face is peaceful. The face of a young man who has worked hard and eaten well and has no worries beyond the next task. The older assistant has not moved, and his breathing has deepened into the soft, rough sound of a light sleep. You are the only one still fully awake, and you do not mind. You sit with your back against the oak, your hands resting on your knees, and you let the minutes pass without counting them, each moment dissolving into the next, like sugar in water. The breeze strengthens slightly, and the sound of the leaves grows louder, a long, sustained shushing that fills the air and then fades, fills and fades, in a slow tidal rhythm. The temperature under the oak remains cool, but the air in the field beyond the shade shimmers with heat, and you can see the grass rippling in waves as the breeze moves across it. The contrast between the deep shade and the bright sun is pleasing, a reminder of the shelter you have found, and you feel a quiet gratitude toward the tree, an old, patient tree that has shaded travelers and surveyors and farmers and shepherds for more years than you can guess. The thought is not sentimental. It is simply a recognition, a small internal nod of thanks. After a while, you become aware that the light has shifted slightly, the patches of sun on the ground having moved a hand's breadth to the east. The day is progressing, and the afternoon's work will soon call you back to the line, but not yet. You have set no hour for the end of the meal. The work will resume when you are ready, and you are not yet ready. Your body is still heavy with rest, and your mind is still quiet, and you see no reason to disturb either. You let your eyes close for just a moment, not to sleep, but to rest them from the dappled light, and you listen to the leaves and the ants and the distant stream and the soft breathing of your companions. The oak holds you in its shade like a hand, and you remain there still and calm, as the afternoon wears on in its slow, imperceptible way. The breadcrumb has been reduced to a few small fragments by the ants, and the cheese has softened in the warmth, and the Posca flask is nearly empty, and still you sit, leaning against the trunk, your thoughts as slow and meandering as the stream. There is no hurry, no urgency, no need to move. There is only the oak and the shade and the quiet company of two tired men and the gentle, endless rustle of the leaves. The rest of the day will come in its own time, but for now this is all there is. The last of the midday rest slips away as quietly as it came. You open your eyes, not because any sound has disturbed you, but because your body has simply had enough stillness, and you find that the quality of the light under the oak has changed. The patches of sun that earlier fell across the ground near your feet have now climbed the far side of the trunk, and their color has shifted from the white gold of noon to a deeper amber tone that speaks of the afternoon's advance. The older assistant is already awake, sitting upright and rolling his shoulders in slow circles, and the younger assistant is folding the cloth that had held the bread and cheese, his movements lazy and unhurried. You stretch your arms overhead and feel the pleasant pull of muscles that have rested well, and then you push yourself to your feet, brushing the fragments of old leaves from the back of your tunic. The oak releases you from its shade with an indifference that is itself a kind of blessing, and you step out into the field, where the sun now sits noticeably lower in the western sky. The heat of the day has passed its peak, and has begun to soften, the air still warm but no longer pressing, and the breeze that had stirred the leaves during the meal now moves more steadily across the open ground. You walk to the edge of the oak's canopy and look back toward the west, where the line of stakes and chalk marks stretches away like a dotted path across the fields. The survey peg on the distant rise is no longer visible at this range, but you know it is there, a fixed point at the far end of the morning's work, and the thought of it gives you a quiet sense of completion. The road, in its invisible geometric form, now runs from the camp gate all the way to this oak, and the stream crossing has been measured and marked, and there is nothing left to do today but check the final stakes and begin the walk back. You turn to the assistants and gesture toward the last stake that you drove on the far side of the stream, the one that marks the resumption of the eastward line. The younger assistant nods and picks up the distempeter, while the older assistant shoulders the equipment case, and together you walk the short distance back to the stream bank. The water still murmurs over its stones, a sound that has become so familiar over the course of the day that you hardly notice it now, and you cross the stream at the same gravelly stretch where you stood earlier. The stones are warm underfoot now, heated by the afternoon sun, and the water feels less cold than it did before. On the far bank, you find the stake exactly where you left it, and you walk to it and check its alignment by sighting back toward the offset stake on the near bank. The two stakes form a perfect right angle with the stream, and you nod to yourself and move on. The final segment of the survey line runs from this stake eastward toward the wooded slope, a distance that you have not yet measured, but that you can estimate by eye. The ground rises in a steady, gentle incline, and the grass is shorter here, cropped close by sheep that must have grazed this field earlier in the season. The walking is easy, and you move along the line with the distempeter in hand, measuring the last few rod lengths and calling the count to the younger assistant, who scratches the figures into the soil with the last of his chalk. The numbers are small, only a dozen rod lengths, and the measurement is completed quickly, the final stake driven into the earth at the exact point where the survey line meets the edge of the wood. From this stake, the road will one day continue through the trees and onward to the next valley. But that is work for another season, another surveyor, another day. Your part in this stretch is done. You stand at the final stake and look into the wood. The trees are mostly oak and ash, their trunks straight and widely spaced, and the ground beneath them is covered in a deep layer of leaf litter that will make for easy clearing when the time comes. A wood pigeon calls from somewhere within the green shadows, its 5-note song soft and repetitive, and the sound seems to sum up the quiet of the late afternoon. You let your gaze rest on the trees for a moment longer, and then you turn away and begin the walk back along the line, retracing the path you have made across the fields. The return journey is different from the outward walk, because now you are not measuring or citing or recording, but simply walking, and your mind is free to wander. The distemper rests across your shoulder, its weight of familiar comfort, and the assistants follow at their own pace, their footsteps a steady counterpoint to yours. The chalk marks and cross scratches that you made this morning are still visible on the ground, a pale, intermittent trail that guides you back toward the camp, and you step over them without thought, your boots finding the same path they made hours ago. The sun is at your back now, and your shadow stretches out before you, a long, thin figure that moves across the grass like a companion. The light has continued to deepen as the afternoon wears on, and the field that was pale gold in the morning is now a richer, warmer color, almost bronze, where the sun strikes it directly. The shadows of the scattered trees and bushes have lengthened into dark, stretched shapes that point eastward, and the sky above is beginning to show the first hints of evening, a faint rosy tint at the horizon's edge. The air is cooler now, and it carries the scent of dry grass and warm earth, and the distant, faint smoke of the camp's cooking fires, a smell that draws you homeward like a gentle hand. You reach the stream again and cross it at the same place, your boots splashing softly on the stones. The elder assistant pauses on the bank to tighten a strap on his sandal, and you wait for him without impatience, watching the water flow past in its endless, unhurried way. The stream seems different now, not a puzzle to be solved, but simply a part of the landscape, a quiet presence that will remain long after the road is built and the survey stakes have rotted away. When the assistant is ready, you continue on, climbing the gentle slope away from the water and back onto the higher ground. The hedgerow comes into view ahead, its dark line cutting across the field, and beyond it you can see the rise where the first survey peg was planted. The groma no longer stands there. You dismantled it and carried it to the oak before the meal, and the rise is now just a bare swell of grass and limestone, unmarked except for the small wooden peg that still stands at its center. As you draw closer, you can see the peg clearly, a tiny, pale, upright shape against the darker grass, and the sight of it brings a small, quiet satisfaction. It has stood all day, undisturbed, and it will stand for many days more until the road builders arrive and the real work begins. You reach the rise and pause beside the peg, looking back along the line toward the east. The stakes and chalk marks stretch away from you in a nearly straight row, receding into the distance until they are lost in the haze of the late afternoon. The line is true as you could make it with your instruments and your patience, and you feel that this is enough. You do not need to speak of it or celebrate it. The line itself is the record, and the record is complete. The older assistant is caught up and is standing beside you, his hands on his hips, his breath coming in slow, deep pulls. The younger assistant is a little way behind, walking with the distemperer balanced on his shoulder, his head down. You wait for him to reach the rise, and then you take the rod from him and lean it against the same boulder where you spread your cloak this morning. The cloak is still there, now warmed by the sun, and you shake it out and swing it over your shoulders, fastening the clasp at your throat. The wool holds the heat of the day, and it settles around you with a weight that is both physical and comforting. The walk back to camp is a single unbroken line from the rise to the hedgerow, through the gap, and across the long fallow field that you crossed in the morning. The field looks different now, the light having reversed itself, and you walk with the sun in your eyes, squinting slightly against its low golden glare. The grass, which was wet with dew when you first walked this way, is now dry and warm, and it brushes against your shins with a soft, rustling sound that seems to murmur of evening. The same stone wall that you stepped over earlier appears before you, and you cross it again, placing your hand on the same rough lichen-covered stone. And then you are on the final stretch, the camp visible ahead as a low, dark shape against the paling sky. The camp resolves itself slowly as you approach, its details emerging from the general mass, the turf ramparts, the wooden palisade, the gateposts with their crossbeam, the roofs of the tents showing pale above the earthworks. The column of smoke that you saw this morning is still rising, thicker now and darker, and you can smell the food that is being prepared, a savory scent of pottage and roasting meat that makes your stomach stir. The sentry at the gate sees you coming and raises a hand in greeting, and you raise your own hand in return, the gesture slow and easy. You pass through the gate and into the camp, and the sounds of the evening surround you, the low murmur of men talking around their tents, the clatter of a cooking pot, the stamp of a mule in the picket line, the distant, rhythmic thud of a smith's hammer from somewhere near the workshops. These sounds are different from the sounds of the field, more human and more enclosed, but they are calm sounds, the sounds of a camp settling down for the night, and they welcome you back into the small, orderly world that you left this morning. Your tent is where you left it, its linen walls glowing faintly in the evening light, its flap tied open. You duck inside and set the groma pole against the corner. Then you kneel and begin to unpack the instruments from the equipment case. The wax tablet comes out first, and you place it on the folding table where it will wait for tomorrow's measurements. The spare plumb cords and the chalk bag are returned to their compartments, and the distemperer is wiped down with the oiled cloth, its surface gleaming as the dust and chalk residue are removed. The younger assistant has followed you to the tent, and is standing outside, waiting for your final instructions, and you tell him to take the groma crossarms and the brackets to the equipment tent for storage. He nods and goes, and you hear his footsteps fade into the general murmur of the camp. The older assistant has already gone to the cook's area, drawn by the smell of food, and you do not call him back. You finish cleaning the instruments, and then you wash your hands in the small basin of water that the servant has left outside your tent, the water cool and clean, and you dry them on the cloth that hangs beside it. The servant has also left a bowl of pottage and a piece of bread on the folding table, and you sit on the edge of your cot and eat slowly, the pottage thick with barley and bits of salt pork, the bread fresh and soft. The meal is simple and warm, and it fills the last hollow of hunger that the midday meal had left. After you have eaten, you sit for a while on the cot, your boots removed and your feet bare on the rush mat, and you listen to the sounds of the camp winding down. The voices grow softer, the fires burn lower, and the sky outside the tent flap darkens from amber to a deep, quiet blue. The first star appears, a single point of light in the eastern sky, and you see it through the gap in the tent flap and name it to yourself, a small private ritual. The day's work is over, the line is drawn, and the road exists now in stakes and chalk marks and the neat scratched figures in the wax tablet, and that is enough. You lie back on the cot and pull the blanket up to your chin, and your body feels heavy and tired in the best way, a tiredness that has been earned by walking and measuring and sighting and thinking. Your eyes close, and the last thought that passes through your mind is not of roads or instruments or distances, but of the hare in the fallow field, sitting upright with its ears turning, watching you pass. The image fades, and the quiet of the camp settles over you like a second blanket, and you sleep.